Hello guys, we are back in new fanfic, and if enjoying this then please share and like part 1. Now let's start the fanfic. The Fire Country's hidden village of Konoha was well known throughout the Shinobi for various reasons. It was known for its many remarkable ninjas that it produced throughout the years, among them the revered Hokages, sworn to protect the village with their own lives if need be, the infamous Orochimaru and his two equally famous teammates, Jiraiya and Tsunade, the feared White Fang, and his son, Kapi Nin Kakashi. The village was also known for its well-tested and productive training regimes, as well as the easy life that many villagers and shinobi enjoyed at the village. What was not well known, however, was the pure amount of barely restrained malice the villagers were able to harbor for a certain 13-year-old boy. It had been bad earlier, when the boy was younger, and the villagers' hatred was still fresh. The hatred usually manifested itself as only a harsh prejudice or avoidance, leaving the boy confused and lonely. However, on several occasions in his childhood, the young boy suffered attacks from the very people he hoped to protect as a Konoha ninja. One such attack occurred when the boy, Uzumaki Naruto, was only 3 years old. It was one of the earliest attacks Naruto could remember, and he wasn't sure there had been other attempts on his life even before then. He had been returning home after talking to the old man, who is better known as the Sandaime Hokage. The discussion between the old man was about the possibility of Naruto leaving the orphanage, where the young boy had currently been living, in another year. Synonymous with hunger, freezing cold nights with moth-eaten blankets, and a verbally, and sometimes physically, though Naruto never spoke up, abusive caretaker, Naruto was ecstatic to hear of the possibility to leave the orphanage and live on his own. The old man himself would have trusted people make sure he bought the right food and clothes. The attack had happened quickly. He had just got into sight of the orphanage and was quickening his pace to reach the door before he was late for supper. The caretaker didn't like when he was late, and would sometimes keep him from eating dinner that night to teach him the importance of being on time. Suddenly a heavy hand gripped his shoulder, holding him back like reins. Naruto looked behind him to see a group of 3 men smirking at him. Each wore the headband of Konoha, and they each had various weapons in their hands. Naruto tried to wrench his shoulder out of the one man's grip, but was held in place, the grip becoming alarmingly painful on his shoulder. No words were spoken. One man swung him back and held him back as the other 2 men took turns beating the boy. Naruto had never been hit before, and a full-grown man's fist, much less a ninja's, was a pain he had never felt before. Then one man took out a kunai, reaching forward and slashing his face and through his lip. Blood gushed out and poured into his mouth, choking him and cutting him off mid-scream. Throughout it all, dark thoughts screamed at Naruto to make them feel pain that was 1,000 times worse for doing this to him. Off to the side, Naruto was dimly aware of the matron of the orphanage standing outside the front door, with an odd expression on her face, something Naruto would later recognize as vindictive. It had seemed like he had been in pain for hours by the time he finally felt the blows stopped, though he knew in reality it was only minutes, if not moments. He realized the next slash of the knife hadn't come, and looked up to see the man who had saved him from his personal hell before falling unconscious. His savior had appeared in the form of a large bear-sized man, with a dark trench coat and bandana over his head. He held the assailant's hand in his fist, and wordlessly clenched his fist tight. An audible crunch sounded and the attacker fell to his knees and screamed from the bones in his hand being slowly crushed. Around the entire group was a squad of ninjas wearing masks, each painted to look like a certain animal or monster. The man in the bandana scooped Naruto up into his arms, ignoring the blood that seeped through his sleeves onto his arms, and quickly carried him off to the hospital, while sending an Anbu to inform the Hokage. That day had been the start of Naruto's independence, a full year earlier than had originally been planned. The old man sat down with Naruto in his office, and explaining the situation, gave Naruto the keys to a small apartment that the Hokage had rented out. The bills were all going to be covered, and a monthly allowance ensured that Naruto wouldn't go hungry. Anbu would be regularly stationed nearby the apartment to ensure Naruto's continued safety. Since it seems the head of the orphanage doesn't share my care for your well-being, Naruto, I've decided that it would be better for you if you were moved out of the orphanage. The Sandaime reached into a drawer in his desk and pulled out a ring with 3 keys on it. This first larger key is for the front door on your new apartment. My new apartment, murmured Naruto, slightly shocked at the speed this was all happening. I thought I was going to get it next year. He asked. Well, as I said, the orphanage didn't seem to offer you the proper protection that it should. So this apartment I'm giving you is just down the street from here, where I can see from this window. The Sandaime motioned towards the window to the side of his office, and I'll be able to see if any problems arise. I've also decided to take part of your monthly allowance. He had to hold his hands up to silence Naruto's coming protest, and use it to have D-rank missions which will assign a team of genin to help you if need be. The young boy nodded dumbly, still shocked at the speed of things. He still wasn't sure about this. He already knew that some ninja didn't really want to help him. Sensing his concern, the Hokage gave Naruto a warm, grandfatherly smile and patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry, Naruto, everything will be fine. If you want, I'll let you choose the genin team you want to help you. Naruto's shock, combined with the kindness that the old man was showing, made it difficult for Naruto to keep his voice straight. He barely managed to choke out a quiet, "Thanks, Oji-chan." The man gave another kindly smile, and pulled Naruto up. I need you to follow me for a bit, Naruto, to show you what these other 2 keys go to, and then to show you to your new apartment. Naruto nodded, his head downward to hide the happy tears that threatened to come up, and set off with the Hokage, walking downstairs and several corridors until they reached a room on the first floor, in a room in the back. Along the wall were several small cabinets, about the size of a full-grown man's hand, all with their own little keyhole. The old man motioned towards them with his hand. These are used as small deposit boxes for various people. When packages for Shinobi arrive, if they are out on a mission, it is kept here for them until they can pick it up. Sometimes Shinobi ask to keep something important to them in these as well. I will be using it to put your monthly allowance in. You'll be picking it up on the first Tuesday of each month, okay? Naruto, finally finding his once loud voice, whispered a quiet, "Okay, Oji-chan." But which one is mine? The Hokage pointed to one of the cabinets on the far right. You're going to have the cabinet number 109. Make sure you remember that well. Now, you know what 2 keys do, so why don't we go see your new apartment? I think you'll find what the 3rd key does over there. A 3-year-old Naruto finally gave a bright smile, and nodded happily. He followed the old man quickly down the main street, which ran from the southern gate directly to the Hokage Tower. Perpendicular to Main Street is Central, which formed a cross between the 2 streets in the middle of the village, allowing it to be divided in 4 quadrants. All along these 2 streets the ever-present clang of metal being forged rang through the air, and different shops shouted out their wares to ninja and shinobi alike. The smell of food wafted through the air, mixing with the salty smell of sweat from the ninjas' training, creating a scent-laden environment that was neither pungent nor heady, but simply home. The northeastern quadrant was where the people with funny eyes lived. Naruto didn't know this, but this area was dominated by the Uchiha and the Hyuga clans. The northwestern part of the village was dominated more by the Aburame, the Nara, and the Akamichi clans. The southern half on both sides was where most of the business was done, and where most of the villagers lived, as well as a few smaller ninja families. It was an apartment complex on the corner of Main and Central that the Hokage led Naruto to, across from the northeastern quadrant of the village. This is it, said the Hokage, opening a door for the young boy and gently pushing him in. Naruto's eyes quickly took in everything about the place. They had walked into what seemed to be the living room, dining room combination, where Naruto would be eating and relaxing. There was a couch immediately to his right, facing a small television, and an ottoman in front of it for him to put his feet up if he wanted. Connected to this room, but separate by a small counter, was the kitchen area, just large enough for him to cook if he needed. If he turned left just before reaching the kitchen, he would get into a small hallway which had 3 doors in it. 2 of them were bedroom-sized, and the third was a bathroom at the end of the hall. Altogether it was a simple apartment, but it was more than Naruto had ever owned in his life. His eyes glistened with newly shed tears as he took it all in. He nearly failed to notice a small chest which was resting on top of the bed in his bedroom. Open it. The Hokage pushed him gently towards the chest, handing him the ring of keys. Naruto took one look back at the Hokage, before turning back around to the chest. Taking a deep breath, he took the third key on the ring, the one he had yet to discover the use for, and put it in the small matching keyhole. When he flung open the chest, he looked down to see books and scrolls, lots of them. And next to them kunai, shuriken, and a small beneath it all, a small neatly folded outfit. I haven't forgotten how you told me once that you planned on taking my job, joked the Hokage. So I bought you some ninja supplies and some things to help you learn a little about being a shinobi, so you'll be able to fulfill that dream. Naruto ran back to the old man and helped him in a tight hug, burying his face in the old man's robes. The old man was probably the nicest person Naruto knew. He took care of him like he would his own son, and helped him whenever he could. Naruto swore that day, to pay back the Hokage for his kindness, to make sure he met the old man's expectations and made him proud, and to protect him the best he could. That was 10 years ago. Naruto was 13 now, a year older than his peers, and was just waking up inside the same apartment that had been given to him so long ago. The sun was shining through the window, warming the room, sending its wake-up call to the boy in the room. Naruto blinked, squinting against the sudden brightness, and sat up, yawning. He stretched his arms to get the feeling back in them. He had a bad habit of sleeping on top of them and cutting off the circulation, making for an odd feeling of numbness when he woke up. He climbed out of bed and looked at the time, 7:15, just enough time. He got his working clothes out, a newer and of course, larger pair of dark ninja clothes, in the exact same style as the pair the Hokage had given him so long ago. Naruto wouldn't have minded adding a splash more color though, for some flair, like orange or red if he could do it. But that was for another time when he had time to buy some clothes. Today was the day of the genin exams, and Naruto needed to be ready. He carried his clothes into the bathroom and got into the shower, cleaning himself off. He got out, and checked himself over in the mirror. No injuries, no dirt, squeaky clean. Good. He wanted to make sure he looked his best today. He quickly got dressed and made sure he had all the kunai and shuriken he could possibly need for the test, but found that his shuriken were missing. Naruto groaned and threw his head back in frustration, realizing he'd forgotten them at training grounds last night. By now they were probably already gone. He'd have to hurry and buy some new ones before he got to the academy. He knew he'd need some for the test, since he'd taken it once before. He ignored the dark muttering thoughts in his head when he thought of his failures. It was annoying how any negativity got him to think so darkly, sometimes with thoughts he was sure he'd never think if he was rational. Shaking himself out of his funk, he put a smile on his face. He found that even if he forced a smile, it helped his mood a bit. Something of a trick he'd learned over the years of, well, enough of that. He grabbed some fruit that the old man had left in his kitchen and started down one of Central's side streets towards a shop he knew that sold ninja supplies. He normally didn't have to buy the supplies himself, instead using a genin team to get his stuff so that he wasn't kicked out of the store, but right now he didn't have time for that. The store he walked into finally was owned by an older man, younger than the old man, but this guy was still old. Naruto navigated his way around the cluttered shop, looking into various bins with simple kunai and shuriken, some higher grade than others. Around the edges of the shop were glass counters, with the better weapons the shop had to offer on display beneath the glass. Up on the wall behind the counters were even more weapons and supplies, ranging from weights to swords, to bit of armor. Naruto stopped by a bin with shuriken in his price range. They were neatly packaged in a bag of coarse material, and tied neatly together with a small thin metal chain. Naruto took 2 of the bags, numbering 20, and walked over to the counter where the old man sat with a book in his hand. He cleared his throat to get the man's attention, who, without looking at his customer, took the bag and checked the price. "That will be 50, the man cut off as he looked past the book and saw Naruto. 200 ryu. "What?" exclaimed Naruto. "But the price is clearly a quarter of that. I can demand whatever price I want, brat, it's my store. Who are you to threaten me and try to make me lower my price?" The older man snarled as he leaned forward over the counter. Immediately Naruto went on the defensive, holding his hands up in front of him. "I wasn't threatening, sir, but I was sure to check the price beforehand and I saw that it was only." "You saw?" the man shouted. "Well, clearly you saw wrong, you little monster. And to think that you would even question me. Get out of my store, now," he shouted, raising his book up above his head and stepping past the counter towards Naruto. Naruto started to back up, quickly spewing apologies, before he bumped into someone behind him. Smelling a perfume, which Naruto found wasn't harsh on the nose, in fact he wouldn't mind smelling it more often, Naruto turned to find a gorgeous woman with bright red eyes and raven dark hair. She looked to be around 18, give or take a year. She wore a Junin vest over a dress that looked like it wrapped around her voluptuous figure, which Naruto found that, similar to her perfume, wasn't harsh on the eyes. Naruto's eyes drifted from her legs up to her eyes, taking her in, before he realized she was looking at him, and their eyes met. For a brief moment, Naruto didn't know what to make of the woman. He would have run if he hadn't been stunned by her looks, and instead he stood there, mouth somewhat agape, his hands still held up defensively towards the old man and his book, and for a glorious moment, time stood still. Then their eye contact broke, and time flowed forward again. Air that had seemed to stop with time flowed again into Naruto's lungs as he inhaled sharply, and the woman reached out past Naruto and grabbed the old man's wrist, effectively stopped the book that was about to hit Naruto. "What are you doing?" the woman asked, her light melodic voice carrying a surprising amount of anger. "I'm teaching this brat a lesson," snarled the man. "I'd suggest you mind your own business. I have every right to refuse a demon like this service." Naruto remained silent during the exchange, flinching quietly at one of the commonly muttered nicknames he possessed amongst the villagers. He had a feeling he didn't want to make this lady any angrier. "Are you aware of the law you're breaking?" the woman asked, her eyes flashing dangerously. "This academy student is a citizen and future shinobi of Konoha. I walked into this store to see you overcharge him, as well as on the verge of attacking him, and you have no valid reason to do either. As far as I can see, he committed no crime." "Committed no crime," screamed the man, spittle flying out of his mouth, which Naruto had to wipe off himself. "Are you mad?" The woman stepped past Naruto too quickly for him to see, slamming her fist into the man's chest, her knuckle digging up between the ribs, knocking the air out of the older man. He doubled over, his mouth flinging open in shock and pain. Spittle flew past his lips and his knees buckled as he sagged to the floor. The woman stood over him, her fist still where she had first hit the man, glaring down dangerously. Her gaze carried a multitude of barely concealed promises of future punishment. "If I ever see you acting this way towards any other citizen of Konoha, I will make sure that you will be visiting Konoha's center of inquiry." The man quickly translated it as "You'll be spending time in prison and having fun with the interrogators the next time." He nodded his head, still too hurt to speak, and laid there on the floor, desperately trying to inhale air into his lungs. The woman looked at Naruto, whom had taken an uncertain step away from the angered woman. She flashed him a brief smile, her red lips drawing the attention of his eyes, and hormone-filled brain much too quickly for his own liking. He purged the picture with an exaggerated image of Sakura, his crush. "Take the shuriken and anything else you need right now." I'll make sure the cost is covered properly. If I'm not mistaken, you're in this year's genin class, are you not? She asked him. Why yes, stuttered Naruto, both out of shyness and fear of the woman. He hurriedly stuffed the shuriken into his pouch and got ready to leave when her question stalled him. You are Uzumaki Naruto, are you not? Yeah. He turned back around to see her smiling again. Yuahi Kurenai, she said simply. Good luck in your exams, Naruto. The Hokage speaks highly of you. I hope his faith isn't misplaced. Naruto nodded, and gave his thanks. He knew he wouldn't let the Hokage down today. He'd be a genin tomorrow and ready to start on his journey to become Hokage. He walked through the dusty street as the village really began to wake up. The streets went from quiet, with stores just opening and empty, to swamped with people. People of all different shapes and sizes were walking up and down the streets, ninja visiting common haunts with their team for a mission or just to train, children played ninja, and civilians in clothes of every color walked around the streets to run errands for the day. Everything became more active. Naruto both loved the activity and hated it. It was good to be able to blend in with the crowd and try to avoid the glares. The only problem with more people though, was there was always more glares from people who did see him. He thought back to his conversation with the old man when he had asked him why the villagers hated him so much. He remembered the conversation quite clearly. He was in the old man's office, just recently escaping a particularly vengeful woman, who kept trying to say that he hated her husband. Naruto knew he didn't, he had nevered anyone before. When he tried to explain that to her, she blew up, slapping him, and then chasing him down the street, snarling threats all the way. He was sitting across the desk from the old man, waiting patiently as he stuffed his pipe with tobacco and lit it, puffing a few times to get it lit, while gently pushing the tobacco with a pin to air let it get the air it needed. When he had finally got the pipe sufficiently lit, he turned towards the boy, who began relating the recent story to him. The Hokage nodded at all the right times, asking questions when necessary, and showed genuine concern. You're not hurt, are you? He asked. No, I'm okay, answered Naruto. I was hoping that nobody would attack you after the orphanage incident. I had put certain warnings out that I would deal a swift punishment to aggressive people in this village. The Hokage nodded solemnly with the thought of his laws, both the one to keep the Kyuubi's imprisonment a secret, and the law of a long visit with the Department of Inquiry with anyone who attacked Naruto. Do you think you can tell me the lady's name? Asked the Hokage. The boy shook his head. He had been told by a few people that if he told the Hokage that he had to pay extra for things, or that he wasn't allowed to shop in certain stores, he'd pay. And he didn't want a repeat of the orphanage attack. Thankfully, there hadn't been. Oji-chan, Naruto tentatively asked. When the Hokage turned towards him, raising an eyebrow, he continued. It had been bothering him lately, but he had to know, and he didn't know who else to ask. He stumbled with his words for a moment, before blurting out, "Why does everyone hate me?" The man inhaled sharply, unfortunately causing his lungs to fill up with too much of the harsh tobacco too quickly, burning his throat in the process. He bent over and coughed sharply, the pipe falling out of his mouth onto the floor. He hadn't been expecting that question yet. He knew it was a foolish hope, but he had hoped that the young 7-year-old Naruto was still too naive to pick up on the fact that a large majority of the village hated him, rather than the small minority he would have the boy believe. He thought for a long moment before answering, allowing his throat and lungs to recover as well. Naruto. He trailed off, not sure how to begin. Luckily, an stroke of brilliance hit him. This might be a little harsh for the boy, but it was much better than the full truth. Sometimes, people have difficulty dealing with the emotions they have of the loss of a friend, or a wrong that has happened to them, and rather than learn to deal with these emotions and fix them, they project them onto others. You are the unfortunate target of many of these people, but when these people realize what a kind person you are, and perhaps even are helped by your kind heart, I'm sure many will see you for who you are, and will appreciate you as a great shinobi yourself. The day will come, Naruto, I promise you. The boy didn't seem to quite understand the mont's explanation, which was good, because the Hokage realized a little sourly, he may have said too much. Thankfully the boy nodded, and stood up to leave. Oh, and Naruto. The Hokage called him back to the desk and pulled out a coupon for Ichiraku's. Go get yourself some lunch, he added with a smile. The boy gave a bright grin and nodded, before hurrying out of the office. Naruto's memory faded as he walked calmly in the direction of the Shinobi Academy. Darker thoughts began to fill his head. He couldn't stand people like that old man at the shop, and he dearly wished he could teach them a lesson. He would be powerful enough one day to do just that, and nobody would treat him that way again. For a moment the thoughts brought up the gorgeous red-eyed woman, and how she stood up for him, and oddly, Naruto forgot entirely about planning how he'd punish the shop owner. Instead, a real smile was on his face until abruptly a pink-haired girl knocked into him. Naruto fell back, just barely catching his balance, and blinked when he looked down to see Sakura on the ground, rubbing where she'd evidently been hurt by the fall. Sakura, his crush. Her pink hair picked up a shine from the newly risen sun, and he had the strange urge to run his hands through it, to see if it was as soft and silky as it appeared. His musings were cut short when green eyes scowled at him. Naruto, she shouted. Watch where you're going, baka. He sighed. It was always like this. Sorry Sakura-chan, he nearly whined. He hated being yelled at by his crush, since it hurt all the more. You'd better be. She growled. If I'm dirty now and Sasuke-kun won't talk to me because of it, there'll be hell to pay. Naruto gulped. Sakura really could be scary sometimes. She could be just as scary as that red-eyed woman when she was yelling at that old man. Naruto held out his hand to help Sakura up, which she promptly ignored, in favor of her friend Ino's hand. Naruto let the hand fall limply to his side, and watched as Sakura fixed her hair and brushed herself off. Ino fixed him with a glare of her own, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Don't worry about it, Naruto. This gives me a huge advantage today over forehead girl for Sasuke-kun's affection. Her eyes shone and she clasped her hands in front of her, thinking of her crush. Like hell it will, Ino pig, shouted Sakura. It's not like you had a chance in the first place anyway, forehead. Ino casually retorted. Naruto took a step back as the two glared at each other, sparks nearly flying from the collision of the two massive forces. How could Sasuke-kun ever like a pig like you? Asked Sakura. My forehead isn't as big, responded Ino. Sakura bristled at the insult. My hair is a prettier color, she retorted. Ino was quick with her own valid point. My hair is longer. We both know Sasuke-kun likes long hair. I'm smarter in class. Sasuke-kun likes a more intelligent girl, Sakura said, but he also likes a more competent ninja, which I'm afraid to say, forehead girl, is me. Naruto sighed, realizing that he was already long forgotten by the two kunoichi. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence, but rather something he was quite used to. Almost every time these two were in the same room as Sasuke, it was like nothing else existed except for him. Without Sasuke, all they cared about was which was better than the other. He turned back around from the other two, and continued on to the academy. He had bigger concerns. Sakura and Ino had arrived a few moments after him, and had already started quarreling over who would be sitting next to Uchiha Sasuke, the #1 rookie of the year, and the sole survivor of the Uchiha clan. At the sight of the raven-haired boy, wearing his normal blue t-shirt with the Uchiha fan adorning it and his normal shorts, Naruto clenched his fists together, grimacing. Sasuke was his rival. In his eyes, the boy he had to do better than, to prove that he could beat. Sensing his look, Sasuke turned towards Naruto, and with a huff of apparent disinterest, he turned away, gazing out the window to his left. Naruto had been training though, and knew that although the Uchiha certainly had talent, it wasn't like Naruto hadn't done anything with the tools the old man had given him years ago. He trained, and trained quietly. Naruto also had an extra year on all of the genin in his class, having stayed back an extra year to make sure he was ready. That, and he did accidentally mess up the Bunshin technique in the exam last year. That was the only technique he couldn't do though, which frustrated Naruto to no end. For some reason, regular Bunshins were a real problem for him. His fighting skills were sharper than most of the genin, however, he had a little more experience than them, after all. And kunai and weapons. Naruto had practiced them every day ever since the old man had given him his first set. Weapons were easy once you got the hang of them. Needless to say, Naruto was definitely ready for the exam today, and then he'd show the Uchiha. Behind him was Akamichi Choji and Nara Shikamaru. Like many of Naruto's classmates that were in clans this year, they were the heirs to their respective clan. Shikamaru and Choji weren't bad guys. Naruto thought they were both pretty easy going in fact, and he wouldn't mind being on their teams after the exam. Choji was a larger boy, who could usually be seen eating, often some form of chips. He needed to do this for his clan techniques evidently, as his clan used their sizes to their advantage in a fight, and the food not only made them bigger, but helped replenish their chakra. Shikamaru, to put it simply, was a wonderfully lazy, but terribly smart kid. One wouldn't be able to tell from his grades, but Shikamaru had one of the sharpest minds of the bunch. He usually cloud-watched and liked to sleep in class. Admirable interests, if Naruto said so himself. Next to them was another boy, who Naruto couldn't quite remember. He wasn't utterly significant. He didn't seem to have anything remarkable about him skill-wise, and was a first-generation shinobi. Behind that row of the seats in the far back were three more important clan members of the village, and people that Naruto had gotten to know over the years. Inuzuka Kiba, Aburame Shino, and Hyuga Hinata. When his eyes met with Hinata's, she turned red and looked away quickly. He never could figure out what he did to make her so angry. But then, she was a Hyuga, and as he'd found out, Hyugas had little respect for him. She possessed a Kakei Genkei, an ability that was only passed on through blood. Hers was a little special, just like Sasuke Tem's. She had a dujutsu called the Byakugan, which enabled her to see his chakra pathways and attack them with her clan's taijutsu style, the Jiyuken. Kiba was, to put it shortly, loud, obnoxious, and overconfident. Though, Naruto had to admit, he had similar moments. Kiba always had his dog with him, Akamaru, which would fight alongside Kiba in every fight. They were extreme close partners, knowing each other from an early age, and were always together. Aburame Shino was quiet. He was also incredibly intelligent, as far as Naruto could tell. Either that, or he thought very carefully before speaking, because nothing unintelligent ever seemed to come out of his mouth. In fact, he never seemed to speak unless it was important. His clan used Kikai bugs to fight. They allowed the bugs to inhabit their body, eating their chakra, in return for their services in a fight. Naruto wasn't sure how effective the bugs could be, but he was sure it had to have more benefits than he realized if an entire clan was based on this ability. The rows in the middle of the class were mainly first-generation shinobi, who were actually the sons and daughters of the villagers, and were the first family members to enter the academy and try to become shinobi. Like Naruto, he supposed. Though Naruto wasn't sure, his dad may have been a shinobi. Or his mom for that matter. Concerns for later in life though, when he was out of the academy and on his way to being a famous Konoha shinobi. The far three rows on the very left side of the class were likewise not from important families as far as he knew, although he was familiar with a few of them. Amy, for one, and her two friends sitting next to her. All he knew about them was that they didn't like Sakura, and had started the name, Big Forehead Girl. For that reason alone, he didn't bother with them. Below them in the middle were two guys and a girl, the one of the guys he recognized as Daichi, a boy who had amazing skills with kunai and was pretty high up in the class grade-wise, probably just below Shino. In front of them were another three shinobi that Naruto didn't know that well, but it didn't matter even if he wanted to know them anyway, since he could see them all pointing at him and laughing. Naruto fixed them a stupid grin and walked past them to sit by Shikamaru and Choji, filling in the only empty seat, as Ino and Sakura had compromised on the row in front to both sit by Sasuke, though Sakura was closer. He'd show all of them soon how much he knew. Hey Naruto, I'm surprised you even bothered to show up, jeered Kiba. After all, I'd heard you failed the last time. Before Naruto could retort, Iruka walked in, slamming a stack of papers onto the desk. Quiet, he shouted over all the talking. The class immediately quieted down, and Iruka took a deep breath, before continuing. Today is this year's annual Genin exam. He looked around at the class to gauge everyone's reactions. They all appeared collected. A few seemed to be a little nervous. Uchiha Sasuke fixed him with a confident smirk. I expect all of you to do well. For many of you, this is your first time taking the exam. For those of you who are taking it for a second time, I hope the extra practice has prepared you sufficiently. He glanced at Naruto, which unfortunately many of the class seemed to catch. Whoops, didn't mean to do that, thought the Chunin. Giving Naruto an apologetic look, as some in the class snickered. The exam will consist of a short written exam, which I'm sure many of you have prepared for. However, this will only count for 1/6 of the test. The majority of the test will be outside, when it comes to shuriken and kunai targeting counting for 1/6 each, as well as ninjutsu testing in bunshin, kawarimi, and henjich counting for 1/6 themselves. You will need at least 4/6, or 66 in order to pass the exam, explained Iruka. This test is to make sure that you have the minimum proficiency in academy level skills. An ideal ninja would be able to get 100% on tests, showing proficiency in all areas. However, that is a little much to expect of a genin fresh out of the academy, so we are more forgiving. All genin who pass this exam, however, are expected to practice the skills they did poorly in until they have complete mastery over the skill. He continued. Naruto felt a wad of paper hit him in the side of the head, and turned to see one of the kids he didn't know very well smirking at him. He sighed, ignoring the kid. He had already failed the exam twice. Once he had tried to take it early, when he was 11, to graduate ahead. He'd failed to do that since he wasn't ready yet and instead continued on and tried to take it when he should at age 12. Of course, he had a bad stroke of luck and somehow messed up with the written and the bunshin. While the first one he didn't count because it was taken early, the second one was a little embarrassing. He'd been pushed back a year then to this class, made up of primarily 12-year-olds and ready to graduate. This year would be different, he promised. He had to make sure the Hokage knew he could depend on him to follow through. An image of the red-eyed Junin came into his head, wishing him luck. He grew determined, and got ready to give this test his all. While bunshin was still impossible for him for whatever reason, kawarimi and henji could manage fine now, and kunai and shuriken were easy. That would give him at least the minimum 4/6 score. The written test would be the issue. If he could answer them, then everything would be okay with a 5/6, a respectable score at least. Naruto looked back at Iruka as the Chunin instructor walked to the door of the classroom to answer a knock. Today Mizuki-sensei will be helping me proctor the test to make sure none of you are cheating, and to make sure everything goes by quickly and smoothly, announced Iruka. The man who walked in wasn't unfamiliar at all. He had helped Iruka teach his lessons many times before, normally as an assistant, and he seemed nice enough. He had shoulder-length silver hair, and had a ready smile for most of the class. He waved to them and gave them a simple, "Good luck everyone. Hopefully by tomorrow you will all be genin." With that, Iruka and Mizuki divided up the tests and began to hand them out to the class. There were 3 different versions of the test, each person on a table had a different version to prevent cheating. Shikamaru had version A, Choji version B, and Naruto version C. You have exactly 45 minutes to finish this test, announced Iruka, looking at his watch. Mizuki and I will be walking amongst you to make sure nobody is cheating. Naruto ducked his head and looked at the questions. They were fairly simple, if the first three of them were any measurement. Number 1. State ninja rule number 25, and explain its importance to today's ninjas in the field. Number 2. Explain what chakra is. Number 3. Explain what a Hokage is, and what important role this person fulfills in the fire country. Naruto quickly answered the 20-question test, with 10 minutes to spare. As he thought, they weren't difficult, and he had little trouble. He looked up to see Mizuki looking at him oddly, before he continued on. Perhaps he didn't think Naruto would be able to do this test. He looked around at his classmates in his free time, curious to see how everyone was doing. Shikamaru was sleeping on his desk, the pencil beside him. Naruto wasn't even sure if he'd done the test at all or not, since his paper was turned over. Choji was filling out the questions pretty easily it seemed, taking his time with each one and eating a bag of potato chips in between questions. Shino and Hinata were already done, and Kiba was smirking as he wrote his answers down. Sakura and Sasuke and Ino were all already finished as well. His half of the class seemed to be doing fairly well. The middle portion of the class seemed to have a lot of people sweating bullets, and the third portion of the class opposite of Naruto seemed to be doing well. Altogether the class seemed to be having few problems. Naruto knew though that the ninjutsu would crush a lot of hopefuls, as would the targeting test. After the test they all walked outside to complete the targeting in the training grounds. They lined up and were all told to have 5 shuriken and 5 kunai ready. They each stepped up in turn and tried to hit the 5 bullseyes on the targets for each of the weapons. Naruto glared when Sasuke decided to show off and throw all 5 of each at the same time, 5 kunai with one hand and 5 shuriken with the other, and nailed all of the kunai. Sasuke-kun is so cool, squealed one of his fangirls. Again, Naruto's half of the class seemed to do fairly better than the rest, with the exception of Daichi, who pulled off the same feat as Sasuke, though with much less fanfare afterwards. Uzumaki Naruto, called out Iruka. It's your turn. Naruto nodded and stepped forward, preparing his kunai. He decided to finish it carefully rather than showy like Sasuke, and took careful aim. This would be easy. Mizuki watched as the yellow-haired genin got ready. He couldn't stand the fact that this demon brat was taking this exam, much less allowed into the academy. But it would be over his dead body if the boy ever passed this exam. He glanced at Iruka. How could the man forgive the brat after what he'd done all those years ago? Couldn't he see he was a demon? Mizuki knew he'd have to take care of this himself. Iruka was too loyal to fail the boy purposely. Behind his back, he made a few hand seals. Naruto took a deep breath and threw his kunai first, quickly but carefully. He nodded as he saw them travel to exactly where he aimed them, but abruptly laughter broke out from the students behind him. Naruto blinked, and realized, he'd missed the training targets completely. All 5 of his kunai were in the dirt several yards behind where the targets were. How could that be? He could have done this blindfolded. Iruka got the class to quiet down while Naruto shook himself and pulled out the shuriken. He'd make sure that these ones hit. Maybe Iruka would be a little kind and still pass him if he got all bullseyes with the shuriken. He took another calming breath, and released his shuriken. This was it. These were sure to hit, he was sure. What the? Again, all of his airborne weapons missed the targets completely, and landed off in the dirt past the targets. The class all laughed again, and jeers of, "Doby," and, "Nice aim," dead last, were shouted from the students. Naruto hung his head in shame, too embarrassed to look at his classmates. He did, however, notice Shino and Shikamaru looking at him oddly. How had he missed? What did I do wrong? He thought to himself. When the class had finally calmed down, they were all told to line up in the hallway outside their regular classroom while each student stepped inside to complete testing. As Naruto's name was called, he took a step inside to see Iruka and Mizuki sitting and smiling at him. Okay Naruto, I'm going to need you to perform a henge to look like me, a kawarimi, as well as 2 bunshin, said Iruka. Naruto nodded and performed the henge. Uruka nodded and marked something down on his clipboard. After the Kawarimi, it was the same thing. Then they reached the Bunshin. I can do this, thought Naruto fiercely. He had to pull off a Bunshin, or he'd only have a 3/6, that is, if he passed the written. 3/6 was not a passing grade. He took a deep calming breath, checking to make sure he was doing the hand seals right. He made the seal and channeled the chakra into the technique. A cloud of smoke poofed up on either side of him, and Naruto looked at each, trying to see if he'd done it correctly. The moment seemed to take forever though as the smoke slowly cleared, allowing him to see two clones that were pale and malformed, resembling a sickly, mangled body more than Naruto himself. Naruto. Uruka sighed, disappointment clearly in his voice. You've failed. The words rang through the room, stabbing into Naruto's heart like kunai. After trying so hard, after practicing so much, and after so many promises to the Hokage, he still failed. Naruto hung his head, too ashamed to look up and meet Uruka's eyes, or notice the slight smirk on Mizuki's face. He walked out of the room to where other students were still waiting for their turns to take the exam. He ignored the questions of, how'd it go? And laughter from those who realized he'd failed, and he kept walking, far past his classmates, outside onto the swing. He sat there for what seemed like forever, watching as the kids who passed were gathering outside the front door to the academy, waiting for their proud parents to pick them up, smiling at their child's success. He ignored some of the whispers he heard from the older crowd, about how they were glad he failed. He caught a few passing sympathetic glances, but it did little to subside his sadness. Again his thoughts turned darker. His thoughts began to be clouded by ideas and images, suggesting he take control and show he was better than them. He saw a woman glaring at him from the crowd of his classmates, and he glared back, putting all his hatred he could into his eyes, and received a approving murmur in his thoughts when the woman flinched back. This was how Mizuki found Naruto, on the swing, his legs barely touching the ground beneath him as her intent rolled off the small genin in waves towards some of the older villagers in the crowd. He stopped for a moment, wishing he could the boy now and be done with it, but he had to wait. The demon could live till tonight, after he'd served his purpose. The older man put his hand on Naruto's shoulder, and when the boy looked up behind him at the smiling Chunin, Mizuki put his plan into action. You know Naruto, Uruka only made that decision because he wants you to grow into a strong ninja for the leaf. You shouldn't let it discourage you. The boy nodded glumly for a moment before turning away to think things over. But Mizuki wasn't done yet. Wait, Naruto. You can prove to Uruka that you're ready to become a genin now if you are determined enough. This stopped the boy in his tracks, and he excitedly turned around towards Mizuki. How, Mizuki-sensei? The Chunin smiled to himself. This is too easy. There is a second, less common way to become a genin. It was what the villages used to do in the days before academies. All you have to do is prove your skills in the field. To do this, there is a scroll in the Hokage's tower that is kept there in a special room, guarded by genjutsu and traps. In the old days, it was traditional for the aspiring ninja to take this scroll out of the tower and learn at least one skill from the scroll, and deliver it to the Chunin, testing him without the Hokage, or other ninjas in the village stopping him. So I need to take a scroll from the Hokage tower and learn something from it. I can do that. I'll go get it now, declared Naruto, about to hurry off to the tower. Mizuki quickly pulled the boy back. Not yet, he snarled. Realizing he may have come on a bit strongly, he calmed himself down. A few tips for you. Do it tonight when less people are around. Then when you get this scroll, which will be on the 3rd floor of the Hokage tower at the far end of the hall, you'll head northwards into the forest behind the Hokage monuments. You'll find an old shack in a clearing about 5 minutes in. I'll be waiting there for you. He winked and walked away from the boy, happy with himself for his ingenious plan. Quote colon 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 quote. Hours later, after Naruto had planned his entire route through the Hokage Tower, and even scouted out the building earlier, the young academy student dropout hurried over the rooftops along Main Street until he reached the tower. He jumped from one of the roofs onto a ledge on top of the second floor and gently opened one of the windows. After climbing in, he found he was one room over too far from where he planned to enter, but it didn't matter much. He went out into the hall and climbed up the stairs, carefully checking for any other ninja in the building. He'd heard conversations going on down a few halls, but never actually ran into anyone. When he'd finally got up to the third floor in the main hall, he headed down to the far end, towards the only door with several locks on it. It had to be that one. His original plan had been to head through the door and avoid the traps, but seeing the locks on the door, he realized he wouldn't be able to pick the locks properly. He made a mental note to learn how to do that properly, and came up with a new plan. The ceiling on the hallway was made of individual panels, held together by thin metal strips. If he jumped and pushed off the wall to reach the ceiling, he found that he could push the panels aside pretty easily. When he pushed one away entirely, he saw that there was room enough for him to crawl in, with more to spare. He pushed off the wall again mid-jump, and clung onto the ceiling with his fingers. Pulling himself up, he was glad to see that he could just squeeze by and get past the point where the door was below him. He crawled past that point where he thought the door was and continued until he was on the far side of the room. He carefully put his nails into the small divides between the panels and picked up one of them, sliding it out of the way as he did so. He dropped down out of the new opening in the ceiling and replaced the panel to where it should have been. He looked at his new surroundings. The entire room was surrounded with scrolls and several weapons and books. He inspected the walls near the door he had been planning on entering through and saw several trip wires attached nearby, as well as a trap that was set to go off as soon as the door began to enter. Idly, he wondered how someone was really supposed to enter the room. He wasn't sure how someone could disable the traps from the other side of the door. Either way, it didn't matter. He looked towards the scroll that Mizuki had described to him, with purple markings on the outer edges, along. Unrolling it, he found the techniques that Mizuki had described. Wow, some of these are really cool techniques. He looked down for one that looked like he could learn. Cage Bunshin. Beneath the jutsu was its description. Rank. A class jutsu. Description. Allows the user to make solid bunshins to deal and receive damage while dividing chakra reserves equally. The bunshins have their own level of intelligence, corresponding to that of the user. A primary advantage of the Cage Bunshin is that all newly acquired knowledge by the bunshins is transferred to the user upon dispelling. Technique was banned by Shadaime Hokage. Naruto glanced around furtively, and saw a window with several traps attached to it as well. Rather than climbing through the ceiling passages and dropping down into a hallway with guards possibly walking by, Naruto just cut the traps and jumped out the window. He landed on the roof of a nearby building and ended in a roll. Getting up, he hurried into a run to the north, towards the Hokage monument. When he'd entered the forest, he paused for a moment in a clearing, before he reached where Mizuki would be waiting for him. He had to make sure he learned at least one skill from the scroll. Opening it, he quickly scanned for techniques that he could probably use. The Cage Bunshin one from before had interested him, and he quickly found it again. He read through the proper hand seals and the way to gather your chakra, and finally settled down to practice. A full hour later, he already memorized the workings behind the technique, and although Naruto wasn't sure how many clones he was supposed to be able to make, he could easily make a couple hundred. Hey, this technique isn't that hard. I can't wait to see the look on everyone's face when they see me use this. He suddenly had the odd idea to copy down these techniques, and practice them as he pleased later. Not seeing any harm in this, Naruto quickly scanned through a few techniques for ones that looked interesting. Lower Covenant Technique. Rank: S-Class Jutsu. Description: while the full uses are generally unknown, the jutsu is said to allow the user to contact and, the words were smudged here, in return for the, and smudged here as well. The exact method of carrying out the jutsu is unclear. Shadaime Hokage banned the use of this jutsu after Uchiha Madara's questionable use, and the following fight at the Valley of the End. Naruto frowned at the smudged portions of the scroll, wishing the scroll wasn't so damaged that the description was illegible, as well as the scroll having the full directions of having the technique. Instead it had a vague description of the possible seals and the chakra manipulation. Apparently the person who wrote this scroll didn't know how to do the jutsu themselves. Either way, Naruto was eager to have the chance to learn an S-class jutsu, so he quickly wrote it down, promising himself to look up more information on the jutsu later. After he wrote down the first technique, he immediately saw another powerful technique, piquing his interest. Berserker Technique. Rank: a class jutsu. Description: originally an Inuzuka technique, the Berserker Jutsu creates an effect similar to opening the gates at a greater cost. Using this jutsu results in an increase in the user's bloodlust, reaction rate, strength, and a minimal increase in speed, at a high cost in chakra and life force. Technique may also user if the person is wounded greatly. Banned by decree of Shadaime Hokage and Nadaime Hokage in agreement with Inuzuka clan head, after increasing losses in Inuzuka clan. One of the lower ones caught Naruto's eye. It was written in a different handwriting than the rest, and at the bottom Naruto found why. Old Man Hokage banned this one. Shiki Fuin. Rank: S-Class Sealing Jutsu. Description: created by the Yondaime, this is perhaps the most dangerous, as well as the most powerful sealing technique. It calls upon the Shinigami itself to seal the soul of any target into an object, at the cost of the user's life. After its use 13 years ago, and the Yondaime's subsequent death because of its use, the Sandaime decreed that it would be permanently banned from use unless a dire emergency. 13 years ago, that was with the Kyuubi, muttered Naruto. Suddenly a huge torrent of images came to his head, unbidden. He saw a gigantic frog, with a man in Hokage robes standing on top, and then a bright flash of light blinding him. Along with the image came an extreme amount of anger, which fled as quickly as the image. Whoa, what was that? Wondered Naruto. He looked over the technique, but decided to pass by it instead, disturbed by the vision he had after reading about it, and went to look for a different technique instead. He was about to copy down a third when he heard someone coming. Probably Mizuki. He quickly put his copies away, and got ready to hand the scroll over to his sensei. To his surprise, Iruka dropped down in front of him. He looked angry. Very angry. Naruto. He shouted. Iruka-sensei. Naruto grinned. Oh man, I got caught already. I thought Mizuki-sensei was going to show up, but I guess I'll show you instead. I only got to learn one technique though. Mizuki. Questioned Iruka. What are you talking about, Naruto? Hand over the forbidden scroll and I'll see if I can get the Hokage to go easy on you. What? I'm being punished? Asked Naruto. Of course you are. Screamed Iruka. You stole the forbidden scroll from the Hokage tower. Naruto was shocked. But, what? I thought if I took this scroll from the Hokage tower without being caught and learned one of the techniques, you'd graduate me. It was Iruka's turn to be shocked. Who said that? He asked. Mizuki-sensei, of course, shouted Naruto. He told me about this scroll and this place to practice everything. Now let me show you this really great technique, Iruka-sensei. He put his hands together in an unfamiliar seal. Cage. He began, just as Iruka saw a glint of metal in the trees out of the corner of his eye. Naruto, get down, shouted Iruka, shoving the young student out of the way. Naruto didn't know what was happening. One minute he was about to graduate, and the next he was being attacked, and Iruka took the blow for him, covering Naruto with his own body. Naruto could see several kunai impaling his academy instructor. A voice drifted out from the trees. I'm surprised you found out about this place. Mizuki jumped into view on a tree branch. I see, so that's how it is, Iruka growled, gritting his teeth in pain. Naruto, hand over the scroll, said Mizuki, ignoring the Chunin for a moment. Hey, what's going on here? Asked Naruto, thoroughly confused. Naruto, don't let him get the scroll, no matter what. That's a dangerous scroll that has forbidden techniques. Mizuki used you so he could get a hold of it. Gasped Iruka as he yanked the kunai out of himself. Mizuki realized things were quickly going downhill. Time to spin some distrust between the genin and his academy instructor. Naruto, Iruka is afraid of you having that scroll. Let me tell you the truth. A rule was created after the incident 12 years ago. It's a rule that only you, Naruto, can't find out about. What are you talking about? Asked Naruto. Stop it, Mizuki, yelled Iruka, still incapacitated by the kunai. It's a rule to not say that you are the demon fox. Shouted Mizuki. In other words, you are the nine-tailed demon fox who attacked the village and did so many. Didn't you think it was weird for everyone to hate you so much? Suddenly the more images came to Naruto, who held his head at the sudden pain and anger he felt. A great set of eyes behind a cage glared down at him, a giant set of teeth shining in the darkness. The teeth opened and let out a huge roar, before snapping him. The image ended and another came, a nine-tailed fox slaughtering shinobi, swatting them away like flies, and roaring with rage. A raging voice came to his head, sounding awfully similar to the dark thoughts Naruto would sometimes have while depressed. So you can hear me, whelp. Him. It boomed, rip the silver-haired man to shreds and show him my Jinchuriki's power. When Naruto only sat there, clutching his head, the voice continued. Yes, it is my voice you have been hearing all these years. How pathetic that you never realized it. But I will settle this later. For now, live, and Mizuki threw his Fuma shuriken at Naruto, who could only stand, too lost in the hurricane of thoughts to do anything about it. Duck! Naruto! Yelled Iruka, who had finally freed himself from the kunai. He dived in front of the kunai and protected Naruto with his body, and Naruto, who was snapped out of his trance, could only look up and ask, why? Because you're the same as me, answered the Chunin, coughing up blood. When my parents died, no one was there to care for me or compliment me, so I acted like the clown to get attention. It was tough, wasn't it, Naruto? Tears welled up in the Chunin's eyes as he thought of the lives he and Naruto have lived. If I had been more aware, I could have saved you from such a tough life. Mizuki chuckled cruelly. Don't make me laugh. Iruka has hated you since you ed his parents. He just wants to get that scroll back. Naruto broke off into a run, fleeing from the two Chunins. Iruka could only cry out his name, as Mizuki laughed, promising to the demon fox and take the scroll from himself. I'm glad I used that genjutsu to make the brat fail his targeting. Otherwise I never would have had this chance to use him and to him afterwards. Mizuki put a dark sneer on his face. I'll deal with you later, Iruka. Mizuki changed himself into Iruka and found Naruto running with the scroll strapped to his back. Naruto, give me the scroll, Mizuki just wants it for himself. He yelled. He was surprised when Naruto turned and hit him in the stomach, dispelling his henge. How did you know it was me? Mizuki asked. I'm Iruka. Answered the Naruto doppelganger, who dispelled his henge, showing Iruka in its place. I see. Said Mizuki. What's the point in protecting the monster whoed your parents? There's no way Naruto, the monster fox wouldn't use the scroll's powers. You're right. Answered Iruka. The monster fox would do that. But Naruto isn't the fox. He's a hard-working student that I care about. HMPH. I know I said I'd you later, Iruka. Began Mizuki, pulling out a second Fuma shuriken. But I've changed my mind. He was about to release the shuriken, ing Iruka, when Naruto quickly jumped out, slamming a kick into the Chunin's side, throwing his aim off. Don't lay a finger on Iruka-sensei, warned Naruto. Or I'll you. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. One might think that with all the excitement from the long day, that the newly promoted young blonde-haired, blue-eyed genin would be sleeping soundly, too exhausted from earlier to be so restless. Normally, this conclusion would be correct. Even the normally over-energetic Uzumaki Naruto would succumb to a peaceful sleep after a taxing day. However, the genin's unrest was not due to unspent energy as many would think. In fact, Naruto had nearly stumbled into his apartment after eating a celebratory dinner with his sensei, Iruka, early that day. So, tired, mumbled the genin, eyeing his bedroom door eagerly. He trudged into the bathroom and brushed his teeth and washed his face, splashing some cold water onto himself in the hopes of keeping himself awake with the icy shock for a few moments. Afterwards he turned around and walked to a calendar he had tacked onto the wall. He quickly marked down that on the day after tomorrow, he'd have to go to the academy at 10 o'clock in the morning for an explanatory meeting for new genin, where he'd find out what team he was on and with who else in his class, as well as who his Junin instructor was. He glanced at tomorrow's date, realizing it was November 6th, the first Tuesday of the month. He made a little reminder to himself to gather his allowance and also made a short list of things he'd need to buy with it, groceries, a large part of which was ramen, some new sandals, since his current ones were getting worn thin. He then eagerly walked into his bedroom, albeit slowly from his exhaustion, and barely managed to pull back the sheets before he collapsed in bed, his eyes closing. His peaceful rest had lasted for all but 30 minutes, before a voice had boomed in his head, "I told you to him. You didn't. It wasn't a question. I knew you were weak. You always were, letting the pathetic humans in this village treat you like garbage." Naruto's eyes bulged as he realized exactly who, or what, was talking to him right now. "You are my prison," the voice continued, "but just because I'm stuck in here doesn't mean I'm going to let you be a weakened PATHETICJAILOR. Naruto kicked frightfully at that roar, but, being the foolhardy greenhorn genin that he was, he quickly began to argue back, "I didn't want to him." Okay, that sounded more like a whine, but Naruto was still getting the hang of this. Mizuki-sensei wasn't. He was cut off by a thundering silence. "From now on, you will not show mercy to filthy two-timing humans. Nor will you show that filth that betrayed you any respect by calling him sensei." Naruto gave a slight shudder at the idea of talking to this demon, and turned again his bed, looking for a comfortable position. He shut his eyes and tried to focus on anything but the voice in his head, trying to tune it out. Unfortunately, it seemed that no matter what he did, the voice continued to roar insults, demanding that its Jinchuriki be as brutal as itself was to its own enemies. Eventually, it said something that truly terrified Naruto. "You are my container and yet you are pathetic and weak. If you will not fix it yourself, then I will step in. I will not die because of your stubbornness." Naruto's eyes shot open at that, scared at what the demon could be hinting at. Is it going to break out? Will it try and take me over? Mirthless laughter rumbled in his head, and his answer came to him. "Don't think I haven't tried. I will have my freedom one day. Until then though, I'm offering to give you power. I'll think of it as insurance that you will stay alive, and consequently me as well. Now, I will speak to you face to face." Naruto straightened suddenly, and nearly began to run from his bed, before he realized he had nowhere to run, not from his inner demon. He felt an odd tug at his navel before things went black. It was going to be a very long night for Uzumaki Naruto. Quote colon 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 quote. Meanwhile, across the village of Konoha, in a dimly lit room, Uruka was currently evaluating his students' final scores for the academy so that he could suggest properly balanced teams. Uruka's job wasn't actually to make the teams, but rather, having the most experience with the genin from the academy, he was to file a report on the students' abilities and put them into what he thought would be the most suitable teams, before handing the report over to the Hokage, who would give it a final review with the possible Junin sensei, and then they would finalize the teams, sometimes making changes on their own whims. Seems Uchiha Sasuke has the highest overall yearly scores, thought Uruka. That makes him this year's Rookie of the Year, while pink-haired Haruno Sakura has the highest test scores, making her the student with the highest test scores. Naruto has the lowest scores. That's a shame, he could do much better. Uruka had in front of him individual papers for each of his 27 students this year. On top of each paper on the left-hand side were their names, while beneath them were their grades on every single test or exercise they had ever completed at the academy this year. The papers also had the chakra reserve level, ninjutsu, genjutsu, and taijutsu proficiency, as well as the projected levels that they would receive in these areas. After he'd finished sorting through them all and was well acquainted with each student's information file, he spread them out over his desk, which was brightly lit by the only light that was on in the room, and began to organize them into this year's genin teams. Soon, these kids would be stuck in this teams for close to their entire lives. If they were lucky, some wouldn't pass the final genin exam given to them by their prospective Junin instructors, while others might suffer the horrible fate of the death of a teammate on a mission. Uruka kept this in mind as he set up the teams, deciding that he would stick with the traditional method of putting the teams together, making sure they were all well balanced, so that he would hopefully spare them from unfortunate deaths. He'd rather have the students be uncomfortable with people they weren't on the best of terms with than have them face the cruelty of the death, all because of a weak team. Let's see here, he mumbled, scanning over the papers. Ah, Uchiha Sasuke. Rookie of the Year. Now, let's see. Traditionally, Rookie of the Year is teamed up with the year's lowest scoring genin. Uruka's eyes scanned over the papers till his eyes fell on Naruto. Naruto isn't going to like this. He sighed. He picked up Naruto's information and laid it on top of Sasuke's paper, leaving just enough room to show Sasuke's name. He scanned the other papers. Well, Shino and Kiba both have excellent ways to gather information with their helpers. So I'll put them together. Ah, Hinata also has the Byakugan, so she can team up with them. That's one full team for reconnaissance. Uruka smiled as he put their papers together in a neat stack. Now, we have the Inoshika Cho team that will be continued from last generation, and will hopefully be just as successful. Uruka sighed again, looking over the 18 genin of the original 27 in his class that passed the academy's test. That's a 33% failure rate, thought Uruka with a frown. More people had failed this year than usual. Surprising that Naruto passed then, considering that had Mizuki not interfered with a genjutsu, Naruto would have done it. Either way, it didn't matter. Naruto's official reason for passing may be because of his mastery of Kage Bunshin and helping apprehend the traitor Mizuki, but Uruka knew he could do it on his own. If only I'd been more observant during the tests with Mizuki. Uruka sat back with a groan, stretching his arms and cracking his neck. He rubbed his eyes a bit, blinking when he opened them again, and the bright desk lamp seared his eyes. It was going to be a very long night for Yumino Uruka. Quote colon 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 quote. Off down the street from where the academy instructor was laboring over the possible genin teams, and a few blocks over, a noisy bar was open, casting light onto the dark street through the windows and slightly ajar doorway. Inside the bar were several Junin. Many of them were regulars here, as this bar had been around for some time, and was well known for its comfortable atmosphere. Music was playing lightly in the background over many conversations, and a thick layer of smoke hung in the air. Off next to one of the windows, in their own booth, were two well-known kunoichi of Konoha. One wore a long, high-collar trench coat over a tight, revealing fishnet shirt and leggings that ended at her thigh, reaching just past the short skirt she wore that matched the long coat. She had bright hazel eyes and dark purple hair, which she had tied back. Despite all of this, her most eye-catching feature was the smirk she wore. Special Junin Mitarashi Anko was well known for her smirk. One could read volumes into her smirk, which had more variations than one could name. There was that told you she had the upper hand, another that told you she was toying with you, another that made you feel entirely too uncomfortable, and not in a good way, among many others. Across from the Special Junin was another beautiful woman, with raven dark hair that flowed past her shoulders, and bright luscious red lips. She wore an odd outfit, with one long red sleeve over her right arm. Her left arm remained bare, over which was a dress that seemed almost like it was one long, thin piece of cloth that she simply wrapped around herself after she got out of the shower, leaving many men to wonder if that was really how she undressed, and subsequently, that led to other, vulgar thoughts. The most striking thing about this woman though was her bright red eyes, which caught your attention and seemed to hold it more than anything else about her. One could look at her eyes and truly call them the most beautiful eyes they had ever seen on a woman. It was a compliment that this particular kunoichi often received, in fact, though it was sadly overexploited as a compliment, by men who only had one interest in mind when saying it. Yuahi Kurenai's red eyes stared at her friend across the table as she ate her fourth plate of dango and finished off her sake. "You keep up at that pace and you'll be fat and drunk," she commented wryly. Anko snorted. "And if you keep staring, the men here will think you're more into me than them." Kurenai didn't even blink. "Well, it will stop some of the annoying pickups I get from the drunks." Anko frowned. That wasn't how this was supposed to go. Kurenai normally would have just came back with another stab at her and her eating habits or something, rather than something so annoyed sounding. "What's bothering you?" she asked finally, pouring them both some more sake. She caught her friend's odd look, and held up her hand to stop her from asking what she meant. "You know what I mean, so don't even bother asking. I can tell something is bothering you right now, so spit it out." Just then one of the brave men at the counter in the front of the bar got off his stool, and checking himself over, started heading over towards the two women. Anko and Kurenai both noticed him, the former giving a wicked grin, saying, "Looks like you have another suitor, Kurenai-chan. And if you don't tell me what's bothering you soon, I think I'm going to help the young man out." Kurenai rolled her eyes, though she realized that the man wasn't exactly the most attractive of the bunch. He looked like he was beaten with the ugly stick when he was born, so she thought carefully on how she would tell Anko what was troubling her, in order to avoid Anko helping the man flirt with her. "How familiar are you with Uzumaki Naruto?" asked the red-eyed woman. Anko hummed, still watching the man stumbling his way towards them. "You mean the Kyuubi brat?" she asked. Kurenai nodded, trying to ignore the man who had finally reached the edge of their table, standing there stupidly. "What do you think of him?" The drunk man, hearing this, thought she was talking about himself. He smirked idly. "It's not often I hear two gorgeous women talking about me before I even meet them. How about I buy you two a drink and we get to know each other a little better?" Hardly even noticing what the man said, other than that it was another pathetic attempt at approaching them, they continued their conversation. "Well, I can't say I've ever really given the boy any thought. He's probably had it pretty rough though," answered Anko, taking another sip of her sake, only to find it empty. She turned towards the man. "Hey, didn't you offer to buy us a drink?" she asked. The man blinked stupidly, before grinning and giving her a nod. "Of course. I'll be right back, so you, me and your pretty-eyed friend here can get cozy together." He winked to her and Kurenai before he turned around and gave a victory sign to his friends across the bar and walked off to get them some more sake. Kurenai raised an eyebrow in Anko's methods of getting more alcohol, but let it slide. The man might realize how stupid he was after this. Before the genin exams, I walked into a Shinobi store and found the store owner threatening him and about to beat him. And I don't think that he would have got off easy, especially if anyone else happened to go into the store. The looks I've seen him draw from some villagers are terrible, not to mention some of our own Shinobi. Anko nodded silently, her eyes downcast as she thought it over. That bad, huh? I thought things like that had ended a few years back, especially after, well, most of it ended after the orphanage incident. I remember Ibiki having a few field days around that time. I was too inexperienced to sit in on any of the sessions yet, but I know they weren't pleasant. The man came back, and hearing the orphanage incident, immediately realized who they were talking about. The demon, he snarled, as best he could drunk, his words coming a little slowly. Obviously thinking this was what the women wanted to hear, he proudly told them his own story. Wasn't too long ago I got my revenge on that monster. Managed to get a few good hits on him, I did. The man started to embellish a bit, already trying to capitalize on what he thought the women would find oh so appealing. The brat tried to fight back, but he was no match for me. I nearly managed to finish him off, but I could hear someone run off when they saw me, probably to get the anbu, but believe me, I'd be surprised if that brat managed to walk home that night, he boasted. Abruptly Kurenai stood up, and turned to face the man, who barely had time to react before she kneed him squarely between the legs. Nearly every male in the bar winced and put their legs closer together, as though instinctively protecting their own genitals from pain. Putting her hands into a seal, Kurenai ignored the tears in her eyes and she called out silently, Megan, Jigoku Guka no Jutsu, Hellfire Technique. Suddenly the man's face contorted into a silent scream, as he felt the imaginary flames begin to consume his body. He flailed around on the ground for a moment, still holding himself, when finally he found air in his lungs, and began to scream aloud. Anko stood up quickly and put her hand on her friend's shoulder. Stop it. She hissed. Kurenai turned towards the purple-haired Junin quickly, as though surprised to find her there. Reason dawned on Kurenai's face and the man's screams lessened. The two women turned to see the bartender walking over, glaring at them. Out, he yelled, pointing towards the door. I don't need a whole shinobi fight inside my bar. I get enough damage from simple drunken idiots tripping over their own feet as it is. The women hurriedly paid their tab and hurried out the door of the bar, into the cool night air. A small tawny cat saw them and quickly slunk away down an alley. So, I can see Kurenai is a little touchy when it comes to her little boyfriend, teased Anko. Kurenai scowled at her friend. Hardly, Anko. I don't indulge in such perversions. Anko laughed throatily. Ah, but they're so much tastier young, she hissed seductively. Well, I can say we're bound to disagree on some points, Kurenai admitted. I really do hate seeing people mistreat Naruto though. Anyone who takes the time to actually watch him can tell he's not being influenced. In a way, it's similar to how the villagers used to treat you, Anko. Anko stopped walking alongside her friend for a moment at her friend's comment. Just like me, huh? She fell back into pace with her friend quickly though, and trying to cover up her reaction she teased her friend a bit more. Well, I guess if you've been watching the boy much then I guess we actually do agree, Kurenai-chan, Anko spoke suggestively. Younger is better. Just don't take advantage of him without me if he ends up on your team. I'll expect you to share. Anko winked and smirked seductively at her friend, who in turn bowed her head, hiding her face behind her long dark locks of hair. Much to Anko's surprise though, Kurenai's response wasn't a retort. I actually think I do want the boy on my team, Anko, not for the reason you're suggesting though. Anko blinked, and blinked again. Finally she threw her head back and laughed loudly, the sound of her mirth echoing in the street. You can keep denying it, Kurenai-chan. But I know you want some fresh meat just like me. Anko winked again, not letting up on her teasing. Of course, I will expect you to share. Suddenly her tone got serious. All jokes aside, if he's anything like me, then I really do want to meet him, Kurenai. Let me know how things go after the teams are finalized. With that, the purple-haired Junin walked off in the other direction towards her house. Later, Kurenai, the red-eyed woman, watched her friend as she slowly faded out of sight, the streets too dark to see very far. Bye, Anko. She responded finally, turning in her own direction towards her apartment. Quote colon 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 quote. Naruto found himself lying in a deep puddle of water. He groaned and slowly pushed himself up, barely noticing soaking clothes as he got to his knees, and finally managed to stand up completely, and take in his surroundings. He was standing in a long, seemingly endless tunnel, with halls branching off into the darkness on either side of the hall. He finally realized his feet were standing in a puddle a good 5 inches deep, and he was soaked. He stepped onto a dry part of the ground and wondered aloud, where the hell am I? A sudden harsh gust of warm wind rumbled down the hall, and Naruto figured that the exit to outside must be out there. He began to think about everything he remembered before he woke up, trying to puzzle out where he was. Let's see. I was in bed, trying to finally get some rest, when that bastard fox began to bother me. We had that whole conversation with it complaining like an old lady, when he said, "Oh damn." Naruto looked up to find a huge gate in front of him, over which was a small thin piece of paper that read, "Seal," on it. 2 eyes gleamed behind a cage and a giant set of teeth grinned maliciously. "I am not like an old lady, weakling." Naruto stared up at the fox that stepped forward in the cage. Its body was huge. Thankfully he didn't lose himself in fright. Crossing his arms in front of him, Naruto stood firm and asked, "What do you want, old lady?" The fox took a deep breath and roared in frustration at Naruto's words. "Call me that again, and I'll make sure to make your life a living hell. Don't think I have no influence in here just because I'm behind the seal." A chill ran down Naruto's back at the words, and he decided that he'd lay off the fox for now. "What do you want, Kyuubi? Come closer. Let me have a look at you." It spoke calmly, no hint of its previous anger in its voice. Naruto was about to refuse, but he remembered the fox's threat just a moment ago. He took a few steps closer, only to have to jump back quickly to avoid the set of claws that shot out of the cage at him. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted. The fox growled. "I want to devour you. Rip your arms and legs off and listen to your pleasant screams to amuse me, gouge your eyes out with my claws and gnaw on your flesh, but I can't because of this seal. However, seeing as that still eludes me, I wanted to talk to you about a deal. Just remember though, one hand washes another." Naruto nodded. "What's the deal then?" "Become more powerful. I won't stand for weak container. When I consider you strong enough, I will allow you to use a portion of my chakra in battle," explained the fox. "Fair enough. Agree Naruto. How strong is strong enough?" The fox frowned for a moment, or seemed to. "I haven't decided yet. I'll only let you use it beforehand if I think you need it to survive. You'd better hope you don't disappoint me. For now, I will give something out of good faith." Naruto immediately brightened up. "Oh, is it a super powerful jutsu? Something that I can defeat everyone with and become Hokage? Or maybe it's..." "Silence!" roared the fox, his jaws wide as he bellowed the order at the boy. Naruto promptly fell over at the pure force of the fox's voice. "You will show respect to me. I am the king of the Biju and the elemental god of fire." When Naruto nodded dumbly and remained silent, it continued. "I am giving you advice." Naruto pouted at the word advice. He had been thinking he would receive something physical. But he wisely remained quiet. Use the Kage Bunshin skill you acquired while training. The forbidden scroll you read said it transfers things that the Bunshins learn to you when you dispel them. That should mean anything they learn when practicing a technique will carry over to you. Also, another piece of advice: the Berserker technique won't harm you like it does others. One of the many benefits that your pathetic body receives from jailing me is superior healing. The fox stayed silent for a moment so this sank in, his tail swishing behind him. When you prove yourself worthy, I will give you other boons to make yourself stronger, perhaps heightened senses. In the meantime, I'll think of what I want in return. It glared down at Naruto for a moment before growling, "Now, leave. I'm tired of looking at something so disgusting like you." At that, the fox turned away and went into the dark recesses of its cage, until it was completely hidden in the shadows. Naruto suddenly felt a harsh shove in his mind, as his mind went blank for several moments before he found himself in his bed. He laid his head back down onto his pillow in relief. The sun had already started to rise, and he didn't feel very rested at all. He had things to do though, so he got up and headed to the shower. By the time he headed out of his apartment, the sun had risen well over the horizon, lighting up the village clearly. Naruto walked calmly down the street and walked up Main towards the Hokage Tower. Today was the first Tuesday of the month, and he was supposed to pick up his monthly allowance. When he was younger, it was also the day that he would assign a genin team to take care of his little chores, like buying his groceries and anything else he needed, and bringing them to his apartment afterwards. It helped a lot when he was younger and he would easily be bullied around by shop owners. Now that he was older, he normally could stand up for himself. He usually did it himself, and instead saved the money he'd normally spend on a D-rank mission and instead save it up. He had quite a significant amount saved up, actually, which he kept in his own personal bank, under a floorboard in his apartment. When he finally reached the Hokage Tower, Naruto immediately headed straight to where his small deposit box was, as he'd come to call it. He opened it up and pulled out the stuffed envelope, as well as a second, thinner one. That was odd. He rarely had anything but the larger envelope with his allowance delivered to him. Overcome with curiosity, he opened it up, to find a short, neatly written letter from the Sandaime. Naruto, if you're reading this, it means I've passed on. No, that was just a joke. Forgive an old man for teasing. I'd like to speak with you sometime today when you have the time. Sandaime Hokage. Naruto glared as he crumpled the paper as though strangling it. What kind of weird joke was that, old man? He growled, before turning and beginning to head up to the Hokage's office. He ended up waiting for a few minutes outside the door before he was admitted. The Hokage immediately brightened up when he saw Naruto. "Ah, Naruto, how are you?" he asked. "Good, Oji-chan," answered Naruto as he sat down in front of the Hokage's desk. That's good to hear," muttered the Hokage. "I wanted to talk to you today, mainly because of what has happened since yesterday." He trailed off for a moment, looking at Naruto carefully for any sign of discomfort before continuing. "I've learned from both Iruka and Ibiki, who has questioned Mizuki, that you are aware of the seal now." Naruto nodded, looking more than a little downcast. "Hi, I imagine you must feel very betrayed, Naruto. After all, you have been unaware for 13 years. Not waiting for a response, the Hokage plowed on. "But I want you to know that this was done for your own safety. I originally passed a law that said nobody was to mention the fox in hopes that you would have easier experience growing up. Certainly one of my bigger failures," muttered the old man. "You didn't mess up, old man," exclaimed Naruto, trying to cheer his grandfather figure up. Okay, maybe he hadn't had the best experiences when he was little, but surely he was better off than he would have been without the law. Naruto was willing to put all his faith in the old man's decisions. The old man looked up, shocked at the young boy's words. "I'm glad to hear that, Naruto," he professed. He frowned afterwards though. "I must ask you though, is there anything you want to talk to me about?" he asked. Naruto thought for a moment, thinking to himself. I have been talking to the Kyuubi, that can't be anything good. I even came face to face with him. Should I tell him? Naruto looked up to see the concern in the old man's eyes. He didn't want to worry him. But this was something important. He gave a sigh, and began to tell his story, all about everything, starting from when he first had the odd vision when he was reading to the Forbidden Scroll, to the voices he heard, which beforehand he had always thought were his own, darker feelings, all the way to his conversation late last night with the demon, face to face. By the time he had ended, the old man was gripping the edge of his desk, his knuckles white, in fear and worry. Naruto, he began, slowly thinking of how he wanted to ask this. Did the Kyuubi truly not ask for anything in return? He asked. Naruto thought for a moment, going over the entire conversation. He said he'd think of something. I'll tell you when I know though, old man. The Hokage sat down slowly in his chair, rubbing his temples. This was truly worrisome. Naruto, promise me you'll keep me informed on your conversations with the Kyuubi. Understand? Naruto nodded quickly. You got it. Naruto turned to leave, but as he reached the door it flew open towards him and a young boy of around 7 years old, with an odd piece of headgear, a pale yellow t-shirt, gray shorts, and an overly long blue scarf that trailed on the floor behind him, and ultimately tripped him as he charged the Hokage, crying, "This is the end of you, old man." Both Naruto and the Hokage sweat dropped as the boy fell flat on his face. The boy pushed himself up, and turned to glare at Naruto. Isn't it a little cowardly to trip someone from behind in order to stop their attack? He demanded. Naruto blinked. Huh, I didn't trip you. Don't lie, shrieked the younger boy. The least you could do is admit to it. Coward. Getting a little angry, Naruto took a step forward and grabbed the boy, just as a Junin came running in, honorable grandson. He saw Naruto holding the boy in his hands. You. Put the honorable grandson down this instant. He is the Hokage's grandson and should be respected as such. The boy in question crossed his arms. That's right. I'm Konohamaru, and I will defeat the Hokage and take his place. Naruto was truly mad now. He was supposed to respect this dipshit. Like hell he would. He raised his fist above the boy's head, and slammed it down, dropping the boy as he did so, letting him fall in a heap on the ground. TCH. I'll see you later, old man. Naruto turned away and waved over his shoulder as he walked out. It wasn't much later in the day when Naruto found the boy called Konohamaru stalking him and declaring Naruto to be his eternal rival, that Naruto would look back at his actions in the Hokage's office and wonder where he went wrong while he finished stocking his apartment with grocers, and then went out to practice the berserker jutsu like the fox suggested, with several large groups of Kage Bunshin. Quote colon 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 quote. Back at the Hokage's office, Iruka had just turned in his team suggestions to the Hokage, who sent out the order for the prospective Junin sensei to meet him as soon as possible in his office. Later, 5 out of the 6 Junin stood in front of him. Gekko Hayate stood next to his good friend Shiranui Genma, who had a senbon in his mouth as always. To their right were Aoba Yamashiro, his own son Sarutobi Asuma, and Yuahi Kurenai. They were only waiting for one more person. They had been doing so for the past hour. A lazy, yo, came from the doorway, and they turned to see Hatake Kakashi walking in, giving them a small wave. The Hokage sighed. About time he showed up. He thought tiredly. I've called all of you here because I recently received the information on this year's graduating genin fresh out of the academy. Since there are 3 genin and 6 of you, I'm sure you have all guessed that there are 18 genin total that have graduated. The Hokage handed them each their own papers, which were their team members' information files stapled together. Immediately the Junin got together to compare teams. You gave me the Ino-Shika Cho group pops. Asuma asked around his cigarette. Sounds interesting. I hear the Nara boy is particularly intelligent, despite what his dismal test scores say. The Hokage folded his hands and held them in front of his face as he leaned with his elbows on his desk. It seems their parents really pushed Iruka to put the three together. Seeing the past success with the combination, I can't see any reason to not go along with it. Kurenai glanced at her own team. I have a Hyuga, an Inuzuka, and an Aburame. So far we have two teams made up of just pure clans. She asked no one in particular. I wonder who has Uzumaki. I wanted him to be on my Genin team. Kurenai glanced over at Genma and Hayate, who were both comparing their students. Neither of them had Uzumaki. Aoba was frowning at his students' information, as though already deciding to fail them. Kurenai looked over at his, knowing the Uzumaki kid wasn't the best of students, but didn't see him in Aoba's team either. That only leaves, she looked towards Kakashi, who hadn't even bothered to look at his team. You aren't even bothering to learn a little about your team, Kakashi? She asked as she walked over to him. He glanced at her with his one eye before pulling out his Ika Ika book. What's the point? I have the Uchiha I've requested to train, but other than that, the others are useless. I haven't found a team worth passing yet, and I doubt this one will be any different. Kurenai inwardly bristled at his tone. He doesn't even care. He'll do nothing for Uzumaki. Kurenai turned towards the Hokage in hopes of changing the teams. The Hokage looked up at her with a smile, as though expecting this. It wasn't unheard of anyway, for a Junin to request a team change. Hokage-sama, she began. I would like to request that Uzumaki Naruto is put onto my team. The Hokage raised an eyebrow, but only asked, on what grounds? The red-eyed Junin cast a glance at Kakashi and answered, I have invested a personal interest in the boy, and feel that I would be a more suitable sensei. I'm afraid I can't allow that, Kurenai, said the third. What? And yet Kakashi gets the Uchiha he's been wanting so badly, exclaimed Kurenai. I know for a fact that he's been asking for the Uchiha for a long time now, and yet I can't train the one student I'm interested in. The Hokage just looked at Kurenai quietly, as though considering the possibility. Finally he sighed and glanced over at Kakashi. May I have Naruto-kun's information please, Kakashi? Kakashi nodded, and taking his eyes from his book, handed the paper over to the Hokage, who in turn gave it to Kurenai. As you can see Kurenai, his skills aren't geared towards your specialties. Naruto is much better off learning from Kakashi, as he is more ninjutsu-based as well, explained the Hokage. On another note, Naruto is difficult at times. You being a rookie Junin, and still so young at that, you might not be ready to handle the whirlwind that is Naruto. Kakashi decided to add his own 2 cents in. You might have wonderful chakra control that you could teach him, but that's not something I can't teach him as well. Besides, who says the brat is even ready to be a genin? Kurenai's eyes flashed dangerously as she stalked over to the silver-haired Junin. Fine. I may be an inexperienced rookie Junin, and you may think that I can't handle the boy, but I'll tell you one thing Kakashi. If you mistreat that boy in any way Kakashi, in any way at all, there'll be hell to pay, she warned. Enough. The Hokage slammed his hands down on his desk, getting everyone's attention. The teams remain the same for Kurenai, Kakashi and Asuma. He turned towards the other 3 Junin sensei. Now, do any of you have any objections with your teams? He asked. When none of them spoke, the Hokage sat back with a sigh. Then the teams will remain as Iruka put them. Tomorrow the genin will have their explanatory meeting and you will be meeting them for the first time. Make sure you have an appropriate test ready to make sure that they are ready to be genin of Konoha. That is all. He entered the room that the graduated students were meeting in, Iruka's old classroom, a little earlier than he was supposed to, and he looked at the genin already there. Sasuke Tem was already there, brooding as he looked out the window to his left, not even acknowledging three fangirls that were trying to get his attention, Amy and her two friends. Shino was in the back, talking to one of his bugs, just as Kiba, who was sitting next to him, was talking to his companion, Akamaru. Hinata sat in the far left corner of the class alone, and was carefully avoiding eye contact with Naruto. In front of her was Daichi, who grinned as he twirled a kunai on his finger while he talked with his two friends. Shikamaru and Choji walked in just as Naruto sat down, the lazier of the two commenting that the meeting was for kids who have passed, but he fell silent when Naruto showed him his forehead protector. Naruto rested his head and tried to ignore the two new arrivals, not even looking up. Most of them gathered in his seat, but he could hear two coming closer to him. Abruptly he was shoved out of his seat, and he looked up to find Sakura and Ino, both not even looking at him, hurrying to sit with Sasuke. His seat taken, Naruto turned around and found an empty seat up in the back of the class, near Hinata. He grinned at her as he sat down, but she quickly turned away, leaving him to wonder what he'd even done to the girl. Finally Iruka came in, and everyone who had been talking immediately quieted down. The scarred Chunin turned to face them all with a smile as he began a long-winded speech about responsibility and the pride of a shinobi. Finally he got to the interesting part. All of you, as new genin, will be paired up with a Junin sensei, as well as two teammates, that will make up a four-man cell. These teams will complete missions together for the majority of your shinobi careers. As you raise through the ranks, your Junin sensei will teach you new skills that will aid you in your missions. I'll now announce your teams as well as your Junin sensei, who will be here shortly to take you to your first team meeting, announced Iruka. Anime and manga. Team 2, under Shiranui Genma, began Iruka. Naruto sat quietly listening for his name. Iruka had already called our teams 2, 3, and 5, and he was just reaching the next. Team 7, under Hatake Kakashi. Naruto perked up at this. That name sounds familiar. Haruno Sakura, Uzumaki Naruto, Uchiha Sasuke. After Naruto's name was called, he gave a slight cheer, since he was teamed up with his crush. Unfortunately he was also teamed up with Sasuke Tem. He'd have to make the best of it though. Team 8, under Yuuhi Kurenai. Aburame Shino, Hyuga Hinata, Inuzuka Kiba. Naruto gave another twitch at the second familiar name. This one he remembered well though. Who wouldn't remember that beautiful red-eyed woman? Even if she was scary and angry. Naruto's thoughts turned towards Sakura when she was angry. Maybe just all women were scary when they were angry. That was something to investigate. Team 10, under Sarutobi Asuma. Akamichi Choji, Nara Shikamaru, Yamanaka Ino. Iruka sat down in his desk, waiting for the Junin sensei to arrive. Finally, after about 10 minutes, there was a knock at the door. Iruka got up and opened it, and 5 Junin flowed in. One of them, with a senbon in his mouth, turned towards the class and called out, Team 2, with me. Another, with dark sunglasses and a bandana, called out, Team 3, I am Aoba Yamashiro. Follow me. The third Junin, who had a sword strapped to his back, coughed as he stepped forward. Team 5, with me. Next was the red-eyed woman, Yuuhi Kurenai. She saw Naruto and smiled, waving towards him. Many of the remaining genin looked at Naruto oddly. How did they know each other? They weren't given much of a chance to ask any questions though as the woman called out, Team 8, come with me. Finally, the last Junin, a tall broad-shouldered man with a beard and a cigarette hanging from his mouth, called out, Team 10, meet me outside. With that, the only genin left in the room were Sakura, Sasuke, and Naruto. Sakura was busy trying to get Sasuke's attention while brushing off Naruto, while Naruto was busy trying to get her attention, while Sasuke just ignored them both. It was an odd interaction. After an hour, Iruka got up with an apologetic look towards the 3 genin. He announced that he had to leave, and reminded them to lock the door on the way out. 2 more tortuous hours passed until Kakashi walked in, only to be hit on the head with a chalky eraser, and to see his three genin in the middle of an annoying, loud, argument with little meaning behind it. My first impression of you is, I don't like you. The man stated simply. Meet me up on the roof. The genin glared at the spot the Junin had been standing in before disappearing in a puff of smoke. They quickly went up to the roof to meet their new sens. Yuahi Kurenai lead the way to her team's training grounds silently. Inside though, she was still concerned for the young blue-eyed genin she had taken an interest in. For some reason she didn't trust Kakashi with the boy. Anime and manga. When she finally reached training grounds 8 she turned around to get a good look at her genin team for the first time. She hadn't been paying much attention to them since she'd picked them up from the academy, as her mind was preoccupied, but now she had to put Uzumaki Naruto out of her head and work with the genin she had instead. Alright, before we start, we should all tell each other about ourselves. I'll start. My name is Yuahi Kurenai. I enjoy genjutsu, which I'm known well for my mastery of, and I love to create new genjutsu and play mind games. I dislike simple-minded people who don't bother to see the finer details of matters. She paused as an image of Naruto flashed in her mind. My dream is to be recognized as one of, if not the best, genjutsu user in the Shinobi nations. Little did she know that as she had paused earlier, the young kunoichi on her team had the same image of Uzumaki Naruto flash through her own mind as well. Naruto-kun. One of her genin stepped forward and looked silently at her in askance. Kurenai nodded, telling him to go ahead. I am known as Aburame Shino. I enjoy reason and logic, as well as order and structure. I pride myself on being able to draw detailed, accurate, conclusions on matters quickly. I also enjoy cataloging new species of bugs in Konoha. I don't like people who are illogical or unnecessarily loud. As one writer once said, the habit of common and continuous speech is a symptom of mental deficiency. Dreams are illogical. Kurenai nodded. The genin's introduction was to be expected from an Aburame. Next was the Inuzuka Kiba, a genin of slightly shorter stature than Shino, but more broad-shouldered. He had the typical twin Inuzuka clan tattoos on his face, in the shape of fangs that ran from just below his eyes down to his jawline. He wore a wide grin as he stepped up to speak. I'm Inuzuka Kiba. I like. For a second Kurenai could have sworn his eyes glanced in Hinata's direction, but she dismissed it as her imagination. Akamaru, and training. I dislike overly strong smells. My dream is to be the strongest Inuzuka. He finished. That left the kunoichi on her team. Kurenai looked over to the girl and noticed that she wouldn't meet her eyes, and she was playing with her finger. I'm Hyuga Hinata, she stuttered horribly. I'll like. The girl trailed off here, as she blushed, but continued on, evenly more shakily than before. I admire a person who is very strong and kind, but few people realize it. He inspires me to be strong. I dislike people who judge others, and my dream is to make my father proud. Kurenai gave the shy girl a small comforting smile, all while wondering who had caught the girl's eye and whether the boy was among the genin team and he was making her shy or not. She also didn't fail to notice how Hinata had stuttered a bit more on the word father than others. Odd to see a Hyuga, normally a very proud clan, to have such a shy person in their number. Dismissing the line of thought, Kurenai focused on the task at hand, the real genin exam. Now that we've gotten past the introductions, it is time for me to explain what we'll be doing today. She smiled as all the genin visibly straightened and gave her their undivided attention. I'm going to see if you truly are ready to be genin, by testing you. If you fail, you will be sent back to the academy for another year. Kiba shout out. What? We already passed a test in the academy to get here. Yes. You passed a test to see if you had what it takes to be a genin. I will decide if you will stay one. Keep in mind that this test has a high failure rate, and all genin teams will be receiving a similar one from their new Junin sensei. The red-eyed Junin watched as different emotions played across each genin's face before all of them settled on one thing: determination. Since this team has been formed on the basis of information gathering, a Hyuga with Byakugan, a Inuzuka with a superior sense of smell, and an Aburame with bugs to scout with. I will be giving you a test similar to a mission you might receive from the Hokage one day, explained Kurenai. Quickly she tried to think of a suitable task. One that would require them to seek out information that's not too available and act on it. Suddenly, she found a way to settle her worries about Uzumaki Naruto. Your mission, she said with a nearly unnoticeable smirk, is to find one of the Junin sensei of Konoha. His name is Hitaki Kakashi, and has silver hair and one eye covered. You will be finding as much as you can about him and his team. The most important things are where he is testing his team, what his test is, and how he handles his team. You'll analyze as much as you can without them knowing of this and report back to me. Kurenai gave them all a smile, and told them to start. Now I just need to wait and see. She turned around to see Anko sitting in a tree, twirling a kunai. She was smirking as she looked down at her red-eyed friend. Already sending your team of babies to spy over your interest. Kurenai sent a glare to her friend. It's not like that and you know it. She sighed as she continued, I guess you already know how the teams turned out. Anko nodded and jumped down out of the tree. I heard from Aruka, the teacher at the academy. He's actually kind of cute, I've noticed. Still, I need to check out the man you seem to be so interested in, Kurenai-chan. Who knows, maybe I'll have to have my own taste, she laughed. Kurenai ignored the teasing. It's not like she'd get Anko to stop. Well, how about we go watch Kakashi's teams ourselves? I'm going to need to make sure that what my Genin team reports back is accurate, anyway. Anko smirked again as she put her kunai back in its holster. Sure, I want to see this guy you've got your panties in a bunch for anyway. We can take our time to get there though. Why do you say that? Kakashi is always late. Quote colon 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 quote. So, I think we should all try and get to know each other a little bit. Why don't you all introduce yourselves? You know, likes, dislikes, dreams, stuff like that, asked Kakashi. The pink-haired Genin hesitantly spoke up. Why don't you start, sensei? Kakashi blinked. Alright, let's see. My name is Hitaki Kakashi. My likes, my dislikes, maybe some other time. My dreams, well, that's really none of your business. I have lots of hobbies. Okay, now you, Pinky. Sakura sweat dropped at the lack of information they got from their new sensei, but began her own introduction anyway. My name is Haruno Sakura. My likes are, she looks over at Sasuke and giggles. My dislikes are, she glares at Naruto. And my dream, she looks over at Sasuke again and squeals. Kakashi nodded, hiding his disappointment. Okay, you next, the broody one. Sasuke glared at Kakashi for the nickname he received, but decided to get this over with. Uchiha Sasuke. I don't have many likes, but there are a lot of things I don't like. My dream, or more of an ambition, is to revive my clan, and to a certain man. Kakashi grinned at the Uchiha's answer. It was predictable, but noteworthy. Good. Now you, the weird kid. Scowling at Kakashi, Naruto crossed his arms and said simply, Uzumaki Naruto. I like ramen, I hate stupid villagers, and I'm going to become Hokage. I have an idiot who thinks he can become Hokage. I hear he's a bit creative on the spot at least. A rabid fangirl with no field skills at all, and I have the broody Uchiha, but at least he might actually amount to something. Kakashi sighed as he thought this, and decided he'd give his team his typical bell test. Alright, meet me at Training Ground 7. We're going to have a test to see if you're really ready to be Genin or not. The three Genin sat stupidly as the man disappeared again in a puff of smoke. I thought we already passed the test to be Genin. Naruto asked his two new teammates. Anime and manga. Sasuke just humped and started heading towards the training grounds, while Sakura followed, not even paying attention to Naruto. When they had finally reached the training grounds, they found their sensei waiting for them on top of one of the training posts. Yo, he greeted. The three genin just stood there, waiting for their weird sensei to explain the test. The older man took our 2 bells. These are your objective. You will have. He took out an alarm clock and put it on top of the post next to him. 2 hours to get them from me. But sensei, Sakura called out, there's 3 of us, and only 2 bells. Kakashi nodded. Exactly. 2 bells for 2 people. The person who doesn't get the bell will be sent back to the academy and repeat another year. At these words, determination filled Naruto. There was no way he was getting sent back to the academy. He was already a year behind, and he wasn't about to end up being 2 years behind. He eyed his 2 teammates, secretly hoping that it was the Uchiha that bit the dust. A team with just him and Sakura, well, excluding the Junin for the moment, would be a dream come true, except without the dating part. But he'd settle for a team with just him and Sakura. Sakura was clearly concerned, biting her lip as she eyed the bells. She glanced at Sasuke. There was no way she could get a bell over him. He was the rookie of the year. That left Naruto. She could beat Naruto. Besides, if it was Naruto that was gone, then she's have Sasuke-kun to herself on the team. Sasuke just folded his arms. I wish it was only 1 bell. Then I wouldn't be stuck with either of these idiots. He thought about it for a moment before coming up with a solution. He'd just have to take both bells for himself. Kakashi watched the emotions flicker across each student's face, and nearly laughed at how easily he deceived them. He held up his hand above his head and bringing it down sharply, shouted, begin. All 3 genin hurried away to hide themselves, waiting for an opportunity. Seems they at least understand the basics. Wait. Kakashi turned to see that Naruto was charging at him, shouting, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Kakashi's eyes widened at the student's ability to use such a high-level jutsu. His shock faded quickly though and the Junin fell into a stance, ready to fend off the clones. 4 clones came in at Kakashi, 2 of them sliding from either side, aiming to slam their heels into his kneecaps. A painful tactic. He jumped up above either of them and managed to whip his leg back into one of the clones' neck to his right, while letting the other on his left slide under him. He landed on his knee, directly on top of the clone's stomach. It gasped in pain and disappeared in a puff of smoke. Getting up quickly, Kakashi used smoke as cover from the other 2 clones that were charging him. One had pulled out 3 kunai and threw them at him as he got up, while the other just charged with its fist pulled back. He grabbed the fist that flew by his face and yanked the clone in front of himself to block the 3 kunai, and then quickly jumped through the smoke that appeared to deal with the 4th clone. With all the clones finished, Kakashi calmly turned around to face the blue-eyed genin. Is that all you have? And here I thought you'd have some skill at least, if you could use the Kage Bunshin. Guess I was wrong. Naruto bristled with anger and was about to charge in again, forgetting his reason for using Kage Bunshin, when the Junin reached into his pouch. Instead Naruto stopped and got into a ready position. Is he pulling out weapon? Except Kakashi wasn't pulling out any weapon. Instead he pulled out an orange book. He flipped it open to a page and said, I'm ready when you are. I figured I might as well read if I'm not going to have a challenge. Naruto roared in fury and charged Kakashi. The Junin sighed at the one-track mind of the genin. He grabbed both arms of the genin and held him there as he looked into his eyes. I would think by now that you'd understand, you can't beat me so easily. To his surprise, the genin just smirked. Kakashi's eyes widened as he heard the distinct sound of someone drawing kunai from behind him. When he tried to jump away, the genin simply held onto his arms, much as he had been doing before. 3 kunai impaled themselves into his back, and he let out a gasp of pain, but just as Naruto thought he'd gotten a hit on the Junin, the man puffed into a log, leaving Naruto to curse by himself in the field. Anime and manga. Kakashi watched the genin begin to look for him, finally heading off in the opposite direction. That had been an interesting idea, and against another genin probably would have worked, but Kakashi had known pretty quickly what he'd intended. He turned and decided to see what the other brats were up to. Naruto hit a nearby tree. Damn it, I wasn't fast enough. Brat. Get a bell and I'll consider giving you a little gift. I'll give you another if you manage to hit him a bit, growled the Kyuubi, who was thoroughly pissed at the Junin's insult to Naruto with the book. Naruto grinned at the fox's offer, already coming up with a new idea to get the Junin. Hey, I need to find Sasuke, Tem and Sakura. Quote colon 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 quote. Sasuke frowned as he heard Sakura's scream. That made two of his teammates that their Junin sensei had beat. Weak idiots, he thought. He decided that the older ninja was simply going after each one of them. That meant that Sasuke should just let the Junin find him in an area that he wanted to fight at. He chose a small clearing that left little room for maneuvering. Sasuke already knew that the Junin was faster than he was, so he had to make it a small area so the Junin wouldn't be able to move much. Abruptly he felt a presence directly behind him. It seems you're the last one, said Kakashi. You may have taken out those two, but I'm not like them, said Sasuke, idly, not even bothering to face the Junin. Sasuke had barely finished speaking when he turned around and blew a huge Kaden Gokaku no Jutsu at the Junin, whom barely managed to use Kawarimi to get out of the blast. Sasuke turned again and closed in on the recovering Junin, determined to get both bells. Kurenai and Anko watched the genin of Team 7 slowly fail their Junin's test. Looks like Kakashi isn't going easy on them, even with the Uchiha he wanted so badly, muttered Anko. Kurenai sighed. Well, it's not over yet. I hear Kakashi usually gives them another chance after the time's up. Besides, it looks like both the Uchiha and Naruto each had their own little strategies to actually make Kakashi work a little. Anko nodded. I'm surprised at the brat's Kage Bunshin. He must have some huge chakra reserves. She glanced at Kurenai. You really did pick an interesting one. Both women watched as Naruto began to set up several traps, covering the clearing he was in, which was smaller than what the Uchiha had chosen to battle Kakashi in. When he was done, Naruto quickly sent two clones off, telling them each to find Sasuke and Sakura and bring them here. Did he figure out he needs to use teamwork? Asked Kurenai. Anko, curious, sent her own clones after Naruto's. After a few moments, she chuckled. Doesn't seem like it. He told them to come to the clearing, but he didn't say anything about teamwork. It won't matter though. The Uchiha refused. The Haruno said she'd come if Sasuke did. Kurenai frowned at Team 7's actions so far. Every year there was one team that ended up this way, one with the top of the class and the lowest in the class, as well as a fangirl. In all the years, there has never been a successful team made this way. Even the Sannin, well-known and powerful ninja in their own right, ended up with a nuke nin. She was broken out of her thoughts when Anko nudged her with her elbow. Looks like the brats really thought this out, she said, pointing at the blonde-haired genin, who was hiding several clones in the trees surrounding the area. We're going to have to be careful his clones don't see us. Kurenai nodded, and she and her friend both backed off a bit as they saw the real Naruto lead Kakashi into the clearing. The Junin was still reading his book, looking very nonchalant as he blocked all of Naruto's punches and kicks. Time is running out, remarked Kakashi, his eyes not even leaving the book. And I honestly doubt you're going to miraculously become a better shinobi suddenly. Naruto smirked, something Kakashi barely noticed. Then try this, he yelled, and summoned several shadow clones to charge at Kakashi, who just sighed at the same repetitive move. Doing the same thing over and over again won't yield different results. I'm beginning to wonder what I can do to get through that abnormally thick skull of Yo. Kakashi was cut off as he was dog-piled by the clones, one arm just holding his book above the sea of clones as if he was keeping it from harm. Anime and manga. At the same time, the clones Naruto had hiding around the clearing set off the traps, which shot kunai and shuriken at the pile, which abruptly dispelled, and in the process knocked the orange book out of Kakashi's hand. The seasoned Junin had to make a very difficult choice then. One of his most difficult choices ever. Does he save himself from harm, or does he reach down and save his book from harm, while risking his own well-being? He dived down on top of his book and managed to quickly use Doden, Doryuheki to block the kunai from harm. Those moments, however, were all Naruto needed to go through the seals for the Baruzuruku no Jutsu, Berserker technique, he'd learned from the Forbidden Scroll. As he finished, he could feel his own strength increase dramatically, his own energy seemed to boost as though he'd just eaten several soldier pills. Naruto crouched down, and with a burst of speed, charged at the earth wall in front of Kakashi and smashed through it with his fist. Kakashi had a single moment of shock as the earth wall burst apart, the shards of hardened mud blowing past him with the force of an explosion, before he was slammed backwards into a tree by Naruto. Kakashi quickly recovered though and jumped up to avoid Naruto's follow-up kick. He put his Ika book into his pouch and got serious as Naruto summoned several clones. Now was not the time to mess around. Suddenly, the alarm rang in the distance. Hiding his relief, Kakashi just announced loudly, "All right. Time is up. Meet me at the training posts from before. I'm going to have to tell the Hokage about him using that jutsu." So far he's shown that he knows 2 techniques from that scroll. As the Genin team arrived, Kakashi immediately tied Naruto up, something which Kurenai and Anko, who were still watching from a distance, became angry over since Sakura had clearly done worse. "Well, it seems none of you have to worry about going back to the academy," he announced, much to the Genin's surprise. "All 3 of you should quit being ninjas." "What?" shouted Naruto. "You heard me," said Kakashi coldly. "In case you haven't noticed, I still have the bells. Not to mention that none of you understood the true purpose of this test." "The true purpose?" Sakura asked. "You wanted us to get the bells." Sasuke was just quiet, but on the inside he was fuming. "I knew I'd be held back by these useless idiots." Naruto groaned from where he was tied up. "Give us another chance, Kakashi-sensei." Kakashi was silent for a moment. "Fine. I'll let Sasuke and Sakura eat some lunch which I've brought. But Naruto will not be eating." "What? Why? Don't question me," yelled Kakashi. "I'm the rule here. If anyone gives any food to Naruto, they immediately fail. We'll continue again in 20 minutes. Quote colon 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 quote. Kurenai and Anko watched from the trees as the 2 Genin on Team 7-8, both ignoring their teammate tied to the post. Sakura would look up every once in a while at Sasuke, as though checking to see what he was doing. The Uchiha just ignored both his hungry teammate and the girl, just eating as he normally would. Anko frowned, an odd expression to see on her normally smirking face. "They're not going to pass. The brats have no sense of teamwork, they'll never figure out that they're supposed to give food to Naruto," she said. After a moment, Kurenai shook her head. "No, they will. I'm going to make sure of it." Anko's eyebrows rose as she looked at her friend, but seeing what Kurenai planned, a mischievous smile appeared on her face. "Ah, Kur-chan, you're so devious." Quote colon 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 quote. Shino, Hinata, and Kiba all watched from another end of the field as Team 7 went through their entire test, with Shino's bugs giving the smaller details and him reporting them to the rest of the team. Hinata didn't have to use her Byakugan as they knew where the team was and they could see them clearly, and Kiba and Akamaru's part had already finished as they were the ones who had tracked Team 7 down with their sense of smell. Ha, so Team 7's only strong member is Sasuke. Other than that they're not much. Laughed Kiba. Shino glanced at his new teammate, questioning how accurate Kiba's observation was, especially with what his bugs said Naruto had done. Anime and manga. Sasuke and Sakura had both been ignoring Naruto's pleas for food for a while when suddenly Sasuke turned around and offered his food to Naruto. When Naruto questioned him, he only said, "We're a team." Sakura, always wanting to get the approval of her crush, immediately copied Sasuke, and offered her food to Naruto. Sasuke-kun is right. You need to eat too, Naruto. During this whole time, Shino got another report from his bugs, and he stiffened. Something which both Kiba and Hinata noticed. "What's up?" asked Kiba. Shino was silent for a moment. "It's nothing important. It seems we're not the only people watching this match though. Kurenai-sensei and someone else are here. They're probably checking on us." Kiba and Hinata nodded, accepting his answer, before turning back to see Kakashi yelling at his genin before telling them they pass, and explaining the importance of teamwork. Shino, however, was lost in thought. Why would Kurenai-sensei be using a genjutsu? Come on, we still have to report to Kurenai-sensei and finish this test she gave us. Kiba said as he jumped off back to their own training grounds. Quote colon 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 quote. Naruto slurped down another bowl of ramen with a sigh. Ichiraku's was the best. He leaned back and patted his stomach, pretending to be full. Not that he really was though. Another bowl, miso ramen. He ordered. Coming right up, called the old man at the ramen stand. His daughter just giggled as she took Naruto's empty bowl and added it to a towering stack by the sink. You eat so much ramen, Naruto, it's amazing you aren't fat. She laughed. Naruto grinned at her in response, all while acting up a bit for another laugh. He secretly enjoyed the sound of her laugh. Something about it was pleasant. On the inside though, another conversation was going on. I'll admit, whelp, you surprised me. I didn't actually think a weakling like you would manage to hit the bastard, laughed the fox. Naruto smirked, ignoring the weakling comment. I think you owe me a few gifts, he said in his mind. The fox's snort was so loud in his head that Naruto looked around to see if anyone nearby had heard it. He was sitting at Ichiraku's, celebrating his victory earlier. Luckily, nobody seemed to be looking at him strangely. I did promise I'd give you 2 gifts, one for getting the bell, and another for hitting the Junin. If I remember correctly, you only hit him, but never got a bell yourself, said the fox. Naruto growled over his ramen. Just like a kitsune to weasel its way out of a deal like that. Fine. What's this gift then? Tonight, when you sleep, we'll talk. Right now, you're going to have company. Naruto blinked when his conversation with the fox was cut short and he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned around to see someone unexpected. You. Quote colon 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 quote. Kurenai and Anko arrived back at Training Ground 8 shortly before Kiba, Shino, and Hinata. Settling into a position that looked as though they had never left, Kurenai introduced them to her friend Anko, and asked for a report. Well, she asked. Kiba and Shino both took a step forward, ready to tell her what they heard, but paused when they noticed each other. Kurenai sighed audibly, knowing that this little struggle of power was something that she had to deal with. Finally, Shino stepped back, allowing Kiba to go on. Whether it was a sign of giving in, or just a sign of being more mature, Kurenai didn't know, but she flashed Shino a grateful smile. Anime and manga. Well, we located Team 7 along with Hitaki Kakashi back at the academy pretty easily, with my sense of smell, bragged Kiba. We followed them to Training Ground 7, where he gave them what he called a bell test. He pulled out 2 bells and told the team whoever can get a bell from him passes, the one who doesn't get a bell fails. Good work, said Kurenai. But that wasn't much of an analysis of his test. Is that all you've found out? She asked. Kiba stood there for a moment, silently wondering what he'd missed, when Shino stepped forward. Kakashi clearly tried to divide the team by only having 2 bells in the test while there are 3 people in the team. The true purpose of the test is to make sure that they're willing to sacrifice their pride and work together to get the bells as a team, not as individuals. They fail the test if they work to get the bells for themselves because that shows they're willing to sacrifice their teammates for their own success. Kurenai blinked at Shino's thorough analysis. He clearly had a sharp mind. All right, very good Team 8. We will start our first missions together tomorrow. You're dismissed until then. After the 3 had each left, Anko and Kurenai both started to walk in their own direction into the village. So I'll admit, I was impressed with that Uzumaki brat, Anko told her friend. I can't believe he knows Kage Bunshin, and the Berserker technique. They're both pretty chakra demanding. In fact, I'm amazed at how little the Berserker technique seemed to affect him. Kurenai nodded absently, as she also thought of the blue-eyed Genin. I'm glad his team made Genin though. Yeah, all thanks to you, laughed Anko. Kurenai smiled. Perhaps. I'm fairly confident that Naruto would have fed either of his teammates had their positions been reversed. Oh, well, here's your chance to find out for yourself, exclaimed Anko. Leaning in, she whispered in her friend's ear, and your chance for a date with your little crush. She pushed Kurenai off to the side on the street, and Kurenai reached out blindly to grab hold of something to steady herself, unwittingly grabbing Uzumaki Naruto's shoulder. The Genin turned around quickly, his eyes wide. You, he said. The boy blushed suddenly and scratched the back of his head. I mean, hi, Kurenai-san. Kurenai shot Anko a glare at the awkwardness she had caused, but Anko merely smiled and walked into the ramen stand and ordered a bowl, ready to watch the spectacle. The red-eyed Genin steadied her emotions and shot a warm smile down at the boy. Hello, Naruto. Kurenai-sensei is fine, by the way. I just wanted to congratulate you on becoming a Genin. Thanks, Kurenai-sensei, said Naruto with a grin. It was tough, but my team managed to pass Kakashi's test. Oh, asked Kurenai. And what was Kakashi's test this time? We had to get these bells from the jerk. But there were only 2 of them and it tricked us. We thought that no matter what one of us would fail, so we all worked against each other, but Kakashi-sensei wanted us to work as a team. Kurenai faked a bit of shock and over-exaggerated her interest. And you guys managed to get the bells? Naruto frowned and prodded his ramen with his chopsticks. No. In the end Kakashi tied me to the stump because he thought I did the worst on the team. He gave Sakura and Sasuke lunch and said I wasn't allowed to eat. Eventually, for whatever reason, Sasuke-tem decided to let me eat, since we're a team. That's when Kakashi allowed us to pass. He said we should all thank Sasuke Tem. Anko looked over and could see Kurenai's fists clench. She's probably still mad that Naruto was the one to get tied up, when he was the only one to actually hit Kakashi, as well as the fact that her genjutsu ended up making Kakashi like Sasuke even more. Deciding to step in, Anko put her arm around Naruto, who turned quickly to see her lick her lips, something Naruto found oddly attractive. I'm Anko, Kurenai's friend. I can't believe you passed, Naruto-kun. She purred. You must be an awfully strong genin. She scooted her stool just a bit closer to Naruto, who was starting to become a little uncomfortable, especially when he realized that her proximity gave him a wonderful view. Luckily, he was saved by Kurenai. Anko, I think Naruto might need a little room. Anko pouted. Ah, you're no fun, Kurenai-chan. I was just having a bit of fun. But she moved back nonetheless. Naruto, I also came here because I want to give you an offer, said Kurenai. Seeing that she had Naruto's full attention, she smiled as she continued. This isn't typically done. Normally Junin-sensei only teach the 3 genin on their team, but I've decided that I want to help you learn chakra control. If you want to, I'd like you to keep this to yourself for now, as I'm sure that Kakashi would be a little angry at the whole idea. What do you say? Naruto thought for a moment, his eyes glazing over as he stared down at the counter. Anko and Kurenai shared a look over his head as he thought. Finally, Naruto looked back up with a big grin. Sure, Kurenai, he said. I'd love to. Good. I'll see you tomorrow after your team's first missions. Meet me at training grounds 8. She said. Oh, and Naruto, it's Kurenai-sensei, said Kurenai. I won't be helping someone who's disrespectful. Anime and manga. Naruto gulped at the cold look the red-eyed Junin shot him as he was quickly reminded of how scary she was when she was angry. Hi, Kurenai-sensei. Later that day, after reiterating his story to every person her could find, including Ayame, old man Ichiraku, and Aruka, the blue-eyed genin slowly prepared for bed. He needed to wake up earlier than normal now that he was on a team, being trained by a second Junin, as well as practicing his own skills himself with Kage Bunshin. He still hadn't figured anything out with the immolation technique he'd copied down, and he'd need to use the Kage Bunshin more to figure it out. When he'd finally laid down in his bed, he was almost immediately pulled into his own mind to see the Kyuubi. He glanced around at his dripping wet surroundings and wet clothes, and willed his clothes to be dry. Surprisingly, it worked. Not really stopping to think of the implications, Naruto walked down the hall to where he knew the fox would be. So the weakling arrives, sneered the fox. Ready for your winnings. Naruto grinned and nodded. That is if the furball actually keeps its promises. He sighed dramatically. I suppose we'll just have to hope. The fox roared indignantly. I always keep my promises, whelp. And one day, I swear, I'll make you beg me for mercy. Naruto smirked. Alright, now, what's this gift you were talking about? Eyeing him quietly, the fox began to explain. I'm going to allow you to use Kitsune eyes. There. Awesome, shouted Naruto. You're going to give me a dujutsu? You can do that, really? Silence. The fox roared, pacing within its cage. No, I am not giving you a dujutsu. I am giving you the ability to use Kitsune eyes. They aren't inherited like a blood limit, and they're not so specialized like the Sharingan or Byakugan which you are familiar with. The fox paused for a moment to let the information sink in. What they will do, however, is amplify your intent to a crippling level, similar to my own. They will also amplify whatever your current genjutsu abilities are, as Kitsune are naturally gifted in illusions. Seeing the astounded look on the boy's face, the fox paused again. However, seeing as your genjutsu is dismal at the moment, it won't amount to much. Naruto just stood there, his mouth agape, as the fox went on. You will activate them by pushing some of my chakra to your eyes. When you use a lot of my chakra, the eyes will naturally come to you. Naruto, finally gaining his voice and gathering his thoughts, asked, but how do I use your chakra? The fox gave a barking laugh. Not my problem. I never agreed to teach you how to use it. You'll have to figure it out on your own, or else make another deal with me. Angered at being tricked, Naruto kicked a large puddle of water at the fox, only to be amazed as it turned into a huge wave and smacked into the fox, leaving it soaking wet. What the hell? He thought, ignoring the fox's screaming. Putting the weird puddle aside, Naruto thought about the deal for a moment. What could the fox want? I'll probably be able to find this out fine on my own. I might as well see what it wants though, just to be sure. Fine. What would I have to do for you to tell me? He asked. The fox smirked, or as near to a smirk as it could with its jaws. See that seal? Tear a portion of it off. Naruto didn't even have to think about it. No deal. He said. I'll find out how to use your chakra on my own, thanks. The fox's only answer was mirthless laughter as Naruto left his mind. Quote colon 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 quote. Meanwhile, the Hokage was just beginning to hold a meeting with the Junin of the various rookie genin teams. Come in. He answered when he heard a knock on his door, which opened to reveal the Junin, including Kakashi, surprisingly. Ah, I see you're all here, he said around his pipe. So then, ignoring Kakashi's rare punctuality, let's begin. Genma, why don't you begin? Asked the Hokage. Genma stepped forward. Team 2 failed, Hokage-sama. Then Aoba. Team 3 passed. Hayate was next. Team 5 also fails, Hokage-sama. Kakashi stepped forward, eyes on his book. Team 7, he trails off, knowing he was building a bit of suspense. Quote. Passes. Anime and manga. Surprised shouts of, what? Echoed in the room at Kakashi's answer. You've never passed a team before, Kakashi. Remarked Genma. Asuma took out another cigarette. This must be some type of miracle. The Hokage chuckled, agreeing that this was an odd occurrence. He looked over at Kurenai, whom he knew interfered with Kakashi's test. He had been watching with his crystal, after all. She was just standing there with a wide smile, probably happy that the boy she wanted to train ended up making it to Genin. The old man cleared his throat, and the Junins quieted down immediately. It is truly good news to hear that you've passed a team, Kakashi. However, I believe we need to move along. At this, Kurenai stepped forward, still smiling. Team 8 passes, Hokage-sama. And finally, Asuma. Team 10 also passes, Pops. Kakashi coughed lightly, getting everyone's attention. I'd like to bring up something that was interesting during my test with Team 7. Kurenai's eyes widened. Did Kakashi know what she'd done? Silently she prayed that it was something else. If Kakashi knew and he brought it up, Kurenai could be in a lot of trouble. One of my genin, Uzumaki Naruto, has an odd skill set. While he is unremarkable when it comes to basic shinobi skills, I found that he has at his arsenal both the Kage Bunshin, and the Berserker technique, both of which are in the Forbidden Scroll, said Kakashi. What? That's impossible, shouted Aoba. That brat has never shown any skill, less than anyone on my genin team did even. Genma simply dropped the Senbon needle much like Asuma did with his cigarette, their mouths agape, and Hayate fell into a huge coughing fit. Kurenai breathed a sigh of relief as the Hokage began to respond. Yes, as you all know, Uzumaki Naruto managed to steal the Forbidden Scroll from here not too long ago, while being tricked by Mizuki. I was already aware of Naruto learning these skills. Thank you for pointing them out though, Kakashi. Kakashi raised his hand slightly, palm outward, as if forestalling the Hokage. I was also aware of the Forbidden Scroll incident, and the possibility that Naruto remembered various jutsu on it had crossed my mind. What surprised me, however, was the fact that he had time to already learn two of them, Kage Bunshin one night, and not much longer, the considerably harder and more dangerous berserker technique. Yes. Well, as you can see, Uzumaki Naruto's statistical information does not do him justice. However, I have a feeling that Naruto had some help with that. I will look into it, Kakashi, said the Hokage. Is that all? Kakashi shook his head, and the other Junin were silent as well, many of them still getting over the idea of a genin knowing such powerful jutsu. The Hokage nodded and dismissed them, but called out to Kurenai before she left. Kurenai, I'd like to speak with you. She froze for a moment, and schooled her features before turning around. The other Junin filed out, looking at her oddly, until each of them had left. Once they were in private, the Hokage sighed loudly. Firstly, Kurenai, you should know that it is a great offense to interfere with another Junin's test. Especially at such a crucial moment, he said. Kurenai's eyes widened in shock. You knew? She asked. How? The Hokage took out the crystal ball he used, which allowed him to see various areas in the village. Once she saw it, Kurenai nodded slowly. It was obvious, and she had been foolish to think she could get away with this. However, I will not be taking action this time, Kurenai, he said to her shock. In fact, I think it will be good for Kakashi to finally have a genin team, and also, just between you and me, he winked, I wanted Naruto to be a genin as well. His expression became more serious though as he said in a no-nonsense tone, if you ever do something like this again however, I can promise you that you will be put on review and suspended of your active duty status. Kurenai nodded seriously, and heaved a huge sigh inwardly, both because she still couldn't believe she had been caught, and also in relief that she was off the hook.